Night Sky Base. The last one. Night Sky Base was like Deep Core Base and Piercing Heaven Base. It was deep underground and couldn't be found by anyone who didn't know where it was. Night Sky Base was below the southern continent. Almost no human lived on the southern continent since it was quite inhospitable. While it wasn't covered in snow, it was still extremely cold, and creating cities there would be too much of a hassle. Nick traveled to the southern continent and went deep into the earth. First it was cold. Then it became extremely hot. And finally it became cold again. This means the Zephyx generator is still running, Nick thought. Assistant, can you find Star Sky Base? Nick asked. No signal detected, Assistant answered. It's probably isolated like Piercing Heaven Base, Nick thought. Nick searched for Night Sky Base for a while. It took a couple of minutes, but he eventually found it. Yet when Nick saw Night Sky Base, he furrowed his brows. Something isn't right, he thought. The first thing Nick noticed was that one of the walls was quite crude. It was like it had been split and put together again. Nick already had a suspicion, but he hoped he was wrong. He approached the door and saw an active terminal. He presented his seed and ordered the base to activate. As always, he ordered all the lights to remain off. The door opened and Nick entered. This one is a lot smaller than the other bases, Nick thought. Deep Core Base was filled with machines that took up a lot of space. Piercing Heaven Base was filled with Zephyx. Rising Star Base was disguised as a big research facility. Meanwhile, Night Sky Base was quite small. It was probably only about 100 meters across. There also were not a lot of rooms. As Nick walked to the generator, he noticed something. He narrowed his eyes when he saw a destroyed machine. A prime drone, Nick thought. Somebody destroyed the prime drone that was stationed here. Even more, the system does not have any records of an incident. According to the system, the prime drone is still operational. Nick walked to the Zephyx generator and inspected it. Nothing wrong here, he thought. Nick's knowledge of engineering was unsurpassed, and he would have noticed if someone had sabotaged the generator. After that, Nick checked the pure energy and star energy generators. Also nothing wrong here. Whoever messed with Night Sky Base did not want anyone to notice. That means it wasn't the aliens. If the aliens had found this base, they would have destroyed it immediately. Someone didn't want Night Sky Base destroyed, but they also wanted to do something here. My suspicion seems more valid the more I learn. Assistant, search for top-secret files, Nick said. One file has been found. Do you wish to incorporate it? Assistant asked. Incorporate it. The next moment, Nick saw the location of a big containment unit. Nick entered one of the rooms, and when he saw it, he took a deep breath. He didn't need to make a hole in the floor. After all, there was already a hole there. Nick jumped through and looked at the containment unit. On its side, he saw a warped wall. The Energy Manipulation Knowledge Repository, Nick thought. Nick approached the console of the containment unit and checked if it was operational. It was fully operational. No anomalies detected. The next moment, Nick opened an entrance to the containment unit. The walls parted and Nick entered. Just as expected, Nick thought. Inside the containment unit, Nick saw a couple of machines. A couple of small star energy generators. A pure energy generator. Seems like the Specter went rogue, Nick thought. It crafted a couple of generators and used their own Zephyx to create pure energy. Then, they used their knowledge of pure energy to morph the wall. Since they didn't know a lot about engineering, their manipulation was crude. Most likely, the base took note and sent the prime drone to deal with it. The Specter destroyed the prime drone, but instead of leaving immediately, it repaired everything. Then, they probably learned about the machines and used their generated pure energy to manipulate the records. Nick deactivated the containment unit and told it to enter inspection mode. The walls morphed, revealing several complicated wires. On one spot, Nick saw a pure energy generator, a star energy generator, and a storage for Zephyx. About 50% of the Zephyx was left in the storage. This is imitating the signal of the containment unit, Nick thought. The pure energy says that there are no faults in the walls. It must have taken a long time to find out how the containment unit works. Most likely, the Specter remained here for several years, trying to fix everything without making it seem like it had escaped. It seems like the Specter is not against humanity. If it were, the aliens would have already destroyed all knowledge repositories. After all, the Specter here had to know where the others were. What was their goal? They don't want to go against humanity, but they were also not willing to just wait inside a containment unit. I'm not sure. They can't unveil themselves to the aliens since they would kill them. Having a Specter with so much knowledge was dangerous. That means the Specter needed to remain secretive about their true identity. However, if that were the only thing, they would have just destroyed the other knowledge repositories. That would make it impossible for anyone to find them. Since they already knew how to manipulate the machines, they could have just gone to the reactor and deactivated it. Without the reactor, the spatial fixture wouldn't work anymore, and the base would fall toward the Earth's core, destroying it. That wouldn't even alert the Specters inside, and even if it did, what would they do? The containment units would be without power. Not even the pure one could escape without me reactivating the containment unit. It seems like this Specter intends to ingratiate themselves with both sides. They are fine working for the aliens, but if humanity ever manages to escape, they also don't want to ruin their relationship with them. A neutral party. Kind of like how Aegis perceives me right now. Nick went to the console again and looked at the information of the Specter that was supposed to be inside. When he saw it, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Chapter 888. Specter name, the Caretaker. Gains power by killing people. Abilities, disguise, advanced perception, depression, aura. There were quite a lot of abilities listed, which was to be expected. After all, this Specter knew how to manipulate Zephyx, which meant they were better at creating their own abilities. Peak level 8. A peak adversary that broke out and joined the outside world. Gains power by killing people. Can disguise themselves. Nick already knew the identity of the last knowledge repository. A peak adversary would already be known by Aegis. There are over 10 adversaries in the world, and Aegis knows all of them already. There is only one Specter amongst the peak adversaries that fits this description. Death. The Caretaker could have disguised themselves as Death. The timeline also seems about right. As far as I know, Death has already existed amongst the Enlightened Ones, but it had been quite weak back then. It's possible that the Specter killed the actual Death to take its place. Or that's what they want me to believe. Death seems a bit too eager to suppress humanity. Most likely, Death doesn't know about the true enemy. It probably just follows the sun. Even more, I don't think the Caretaker would take up such a position. The Caretaker knows how the world works, and they know that such a position would not aid their growth. The aliens won't allow Death to become an Eternal, since Death is far too useful as a primary antagonist to the humans. I don't think it's Death. Then Nick looked at the Eternals. Almost all of the Eternals were wiped out. As far as I know, they were all suppressed during the era of the Empire. The aliens wanted a restart, which was why they killed the Eternals and made new ones. The era of the Suffering Ones happened after, and we are not entirely sure about the Eternals that existed during that era. We know that the Sun, the Nightmare, and the Null were already a thing back then. The Maw only rose later. And Nurse Alice. She probably existed during that era. The suppression factor was increased tremendously during the era of the Suffering Ones, which means they probably had even more Eternals than we have nowadays. However, the suppression factor was too high, and humanity basically never got a foothold, which meant almost no Zephyx production for the aliens. So they had to cull their most oppressive Eternals. Based on history, I believe the Maw rose to power during this era. The aliens probably drastically reduced the suppression factor of this era near the beginning, and when humanity grew rapidly, they quickly introduced the Maw to cull the numbers of shields. The fight against Death had to continue for as long as possible. Nurse Alice is not so bad as a suppression factor. In fact, she might even act as a kind of anti-suppression factor. She gets rid of the humans who don't feel any hope, keeping only the hopeful humans alive. She also makes people deathly afraid of wanting to die. Thinking about death already feels dangerous when a slip of the tongue can kill you. Nurse Alice might have been introduced during the era of the Suffering Ones, and she might have even improved overall Zephyx production. The Suffering Ones needed a proverbial kick in the ass. So where did Nurse Alice come from? She was probably already a peak adversary during the era of the Suffering Ones. Most likely, she just stayed hidden and acted like she was feeding on weaker humans. Wouldn't that be the perfect identity for a potential new Eternal? Her kit of abilities is perfect for the job. Almost like she already knew what the true plan was. Nick took a deep breath. In the past, I have already suspected that Nurse Alice might be humanity's ally. I might be right. The chances of her being the energy manipulation knowledge repository are quite high. If Nurse Alice is the knowledge repository, she knows where the others are, and she could destroy them herself. But she didn't. She doesn't want to burn bridges. She saw the power of the Empire, and she believes there is a chance that humanity will rise. As an easy Zephyx generator, she could continue living. Humanity needs a way to get rid of Prefix, and Specters are perfect for that. Even more, if she helps humanity, we would view her as our ally. There is a huge difference between her situation and the situation of the other three. The other three have no choice but to help us. They are essentially forced. After all, they are contained in their containment units. Meanwhile, she is free. She has an actual choice in the matter. And if she actually chooses to help humanity, it would be worth a lot more. But all of this is just conjecture. I could also be completely wrong. It's possible that the knowledge repository died after breaking out. It's risky. If I want to contact her, I need the power to escape. The Sun said that Nurse Alice is supposed to be suppressed in the future, which means she can't be a mid, late, or peak Eternal. Otherwise, humanity would become too strong. She is either an initial Eternal or an early Eternal. I would bet on initial Eternal. She seems to be a good starter Specter, and she is far easier to catch than the Maw. Suppressing the Maw seems more like a big deal, since it also unlocks all the suppression of Aegis. Their number of shields would shoot through the roof, and after the Maw is suppressed, basically nothing remains to be done. I believe Nurse Alice is supposed to give humans the power to suppress the Maw. Humans will grow more powerful, and when they set their sights on the Nightmare or the Null, the aliens know it's time to reset the era. The suppression of the Maw will represent the last and most profitable period of the era. If I want to resist Nurse Alice, I need to become an adversary first. Seems like I should work on my advancement first. Chapter 889. Nick returned to the underground city and told Arya and Samar about Night Sky Base. If Nurse Alice was truly the knowledge repository for energy manipulation, it would be much harder to get her knowledge. Sure, she was not completely against humanity, as evidenced by the fact that the other bases still existed, but she was also completely free. Nurse Alice was most likely the weakest Eternal out of all of them, but she was still an Eternal. Nick needed to be powerful enough to resist her if he wanted to talk to her. Luckily, he didn't need to be strong enough to kill her. Both of them worked for the same being, and both of them knew something their superior would not tolerate. As long as she couldn't immediately kill him, Nick could unveil her secret by contacting the Sun. Of course, she could do the same. But then it would be mutually assured destruction, and neither side wanted that. After talking with the two of them, Nick told Arya about his plan to grow stronger. He would be working with the city's protectors. The underground city had grown powerful enough that its inhabitants could help Nick become more powerful. Arya was still the strongest. Right now, she was a late protector. There were also 2 mid-protectors and a couple of initial and early protectors. The city had over 20 of them by now. Nick didn't need Aegis anymore. He had his own protectors, and they would only grow more powerful with time. The first people who had absorbed artificial Specters had already become late heroes. If they studied well, they would become protectors within a couple of decades. And then they would overtake the old generation with their far higher speed of advancement. Moments later, Arya told all of the protectors that they had to work with a special Specter. This Specter was imperative to their research, and it had to become an adversary as quickly as possible. Naturally, the protectors wanted to know more about the mission, but Arya refused to answer. Samar backed her up. With both leaders in agreement, there was nothing the protectors could do. Several of the protectors had come from the surface and had been recruited by Nick. However, none of them had ever seen him. They just fell asleep and woke up in the city. The more experienced among them knew there had to be some kind of secret helper on the outside, since the city was gaining powerful new Specters at a terrifying rate. The younger ones didn't know about the outside world, and they never asked where the Specters came from. The government provided them. They didn't know how the government provided them, but well, The government was doing it, so it was fine. The older ones knew that capturing Specters was not easy, especially all these demons and fallen. How powerful must someone be to capture hundreds of demons within just a couple of years? All of the protectors, including Arya, entered the new containment unit together. Samar was still a hero and would need more time to become a protector, which was why she wasn't in the group. Inside the containment unit, they saw only an idol made of flesh. It barely moved, only its flesh quivered from time to time. The next moment, all the prefix was sucked out of the containment unit, and everyone fell to the ground. Nobody panicked, since they had been informed beforehand. For one day, everyone suffered the sensation of drowning. Finally, the doors opened again, and half of the protectors left. Arya wanted everyone present for the first session to see how they were holding up. Any future sessions would be split between two groups. Group 1 would take the first 12 hours of the day, while Group 2 would take the second 12. This way, Nick would be working with 10 protectors at any given moment. Another reason the sessions were shorter than in the past was the gathering of suffering. When Nick had gathered too much suffering in the past, the sun had paid attention to him. He didn't want that to happen, which was why he quickly converted the suffering into Zephyx. Luckily, the suffering he had caused Aegis and the world by killing hundreds of demons also helped him. He had already been at 60% of his advancement before working with the protectors. Sadly, there were no peak protectors, which didn't make the situation ideal. However, the quantity made up for the lack of quality. It only took Nick 10 years to reach his limit. When he reached 99%, Arya sent everyone away. Nick returned to his human form and looked at Arya. "I can't advance down here," Nick said. Arya nodded. Specters belong to the sun, and the sun might sense the underground city if Nick advanced here. "I will be back soon," Nick said. "Take care," Arya said. The next moment, Nick vanished. Arya didn't know how Nick would advance, and she didn't want to know. He still needed quite a bit of suffering, and he had to get it from the outside world. This meant Nick had to cause suffering to unwilling participants. She just hoped he wouldn't be too cruel. Nick left the underground city and traveled through the Great Triangle, reading the minds of countless people. Several decades had passed since his deal with Aegis, and Aegis was progressing at a terrifying rate. Nick wanted to make sure no surprises would be waiting for him. The cities had changed once again, and there were many more experts, specialists, and heroes. It seemed like almost every city had over 10 heroes now. There were even some peak heroes in the cities. Seems like Aegis is no longer recruiting agents, Nick thought. They are only interested in peak heroes with the potential to become protectors. From what he had gathered, there were over 200 protectors in the world now. Nick analyzed the technology of the cities and went to Aegis headquarters. He used a couple of tricks to give himself a new identity and read the minds of a couple of weaker people. Luckily, the guards were still just early and mid-heroes. They were probably not allowed to advance as part of their punishment. When Nick read their minds, he had to take a deep breath. Already, he thought. Nick looked at Aegis headquarters. At this moment, pestilence and war were inside. In 2 separate containment units. Chapter 890. Aegis had done it. They had essentially solved their most pressing issue. While death was still out there, it barely had any capabilities to damage humanity anymore. It was alone. If it showed itself anywhere, all the shields would gather and chase it. They didn't need to kill it. They just needed to keep it in view until the champion arrived. The champion was a late shield by now, and he was regularly working with war. Within a century, he would be a peak shield. At that point, he could suppress death on his own. Since the trio of destruction was no more, the shields also didn't need to stay at Aegis headquarters anymore. As long as the champion was here, the headquarters were not in any danger. Instead of staying hidden, the shields flew through the world, trying to find more adversaries. The Shark Mother was their priority right now, and it was expected that she would be found within the next couple of years. Without the Salt Trident, the oceans became accessible again. Aegis is progressing rapidly, Nick thought. Aegis' quick growth was putting pressure on Nick. He had to accumulate as much knowledge as possible before the era ended. After gaining some information, Nick left the vicinity of Aegis headquarters again. Then he looked at the beams. Luckily, all shields knew Nick, and they had all shared their intel. The only one who knew a slight bit more was the champion. There were a couple of things he wouldn't tell the shields. Sharing intel was important, but not when it came to opposing Nick. After all, Nick could now see which beam belonged to a shield. This meant Nick knew where all of the shields were at any given moment. Nick flew around for a while to see where all of the shields were and made his plan. Then he flew towards the east, the old continent of Europe. This was what the ancient ones had called it. Aegis just called it the western part of the grand continent. Aegis had 2 strongholds in Europe now. Nick went to the western stronghold, at the western edge of Europe. There was a shield stationed in the other stronghold, about 3,000 kilometers to the east. The champion was about 5,000 kilometers to the west, across the ocean. Nick used his new identity to enter the stronghold, then used his terrifying perception to sense everything inside. 4 peak protectors, 2 late protectors, 7 early protectors, 13 in total. Sorry, but I have to do this. Nick hid in an isolated room and built a machine. Some minutes later, the machine was operational, and Nick activated it. This device read Aegis' database and created a local copy of the most viewed articles. Nick couldn't mess with the permissions anymore since Aegis had learned a lot about security, but everyone had access to the normal entries of the database. If Nick edited a bunch of entries, an alarm would go off and warn all of Aegis. But reading was fine. As long as he only read common articles, there would be no issue. After copying the most common articles, the device intercepted the signal between the stronghold and Aegis headquarters. It was important to note that the local database didn't interfere with the signal. It just put itself in the middle of it. Next, the local database interrupted the stronghold's network for just a tiny instant. Technology could be finicky, and small interruptions happen occasionally. The stronghold immediately contacted Aegis headquarters to re-establish connection. The 2 sides exchanged encryption keys, and the connection was re-established without issues. But now, the local database Nick built also had the encryption keys. Finally, the local database intercepted the signal coming from Aegis headquarters and forwarded it to the stronghold with Aegis identity and encryption. The stronghold received the information it wanted and didn't sound an alarm. The 2 sides were constantly communicating, but now Nick's local database sat between them. For now, it was just a relay between the 2 sides. Nick changed a couple of settings. The local database would forward normal requests, but any emergency signal would be intercepted and replaced with a signal that signified a regular system check. From the perspective of Aegis headquarters, the stronghold would be operating as usual. No anomalies. No emergencies. Finally, Nick took a deep breath. His perception stretched across the entire stronghold. Then he released his Zephyx. Whoom! The entire stronghold vanished into a domain of pure darkness. Immediately, all the humans in the stronghold fell to their knees as the nightmare's influence took hold of them. The stronger Extractors immediately activated their diverse light abilities, but the light was also swallowed by the darkness. Half of the Extractors sent a distress signal. The stronghold sent a high-priority signal to Aegis headquarters. The stronghold was under attack. The local database intercepted the signal and sent a regular system check. Aegis answered with a regular system check. That signal was also intercepted and replaced with an answer to a distress call. An alarm went off in the stronghold. This alarm signified that Aegis took the situation very seriously and sent a shield to support them immediately. Meanwhile, Nick's Zephyx was rapidly draining. Keeping the domain of darkness active consumed a lot of Zephyx. Luckily, nobody saw him, which meant his ability was active, essentially giving him the power of a late or peak shield. This meant he could keep the domain going for a while. Over a minute passed. Some of the Extractors collapsed into unconsciousness. When that happened, Nick allowed light to return to them. He didn't want to kill anyone. This was not an assassination. All of these people were Extractors. This was just a bit of non-consensual work. After 3 minutes, one of the protectors managed to blindly guess their way out of the stronghold. He's going to leave the domain of darkness soon, Nick thought. I didn't get enough, but I'm almost there. Then Nick shot out of the stronghold and entered the ground. The next moment, all the darkness vanished. Boom! And the machine Nick had built was destroyed. An instant later, Aegis received the distress signal. Chapter 891. Bang! The champion shot out of Aegis headquarters and charged towards the east. The shield stationed east of the attacked stronghold also made their way there. Luckily, even without the champion, Aegis headquarters was still defended. The Tinkerer was still here, and there were also over 30 protectors. Nick watched the champion shoot out of Aegis headquarters. Can't get fired from my job as the envious researcher. Gotta make sure the champion is actually doing my job correctly. Nick immediately entered Aegis headquarters with the identification of one of the peak protectors from the stronghold. Next, he charged toward the physical location of the central database and used the peak protector's authority to send malicious code to it. Naturally, that wouldn't work. Aegis had learned a lot about cybersecurity. However, that was not Nick's goal. The malicious code damaged the database, but Nick was certain Aegis had ways to repair it. Bang! An instant later, the Tinkerer appeared in front of the door of the central database and entered. Naturally, Nick was completely hidden and just followed her in. The Tinkerer approached the console and started typing rapidly. In truth, she was typing in the air. Nick had created an illusion that made her think she was interacting with the console. Then Nick perfectly copied her movements and gained the Tinkerer's credentials. He now had administrative access. In the Tinkerer's perception, the console was extremely slow, but that was to be expected. The malicious code was messing with the system's performance. She just needed to stop the process, but that would take a bit. Meanwhile, Nick just looked through the real settings at the real console. They have several central backups, several secondary backups, and they even have a distributed backup. The barriers of the shields hold an encrypted part of the database. As long as they all gather, the entire database can be restored. Quite clever. However, Nick saw another backup, one inaccessible without additional verification. Apparently, the Tinkerer's base verification was not enough. Whatever was in there had to be top secret. The next moment, Nick killed the malicious code. In her illusion, the Tinkerer did the same. A moment later, the Tinkerer sighed in relief and checked the settings. Nick just typed in what she typed in and sent her everything just as he saw it. She reloaded a backup from the primary backup, and after a couple of settings, everything returned to normal. Then she checked the status of the secondary backups. Everything was fine. Finally, she looked at the top-secret backup. She hesitated. Her instincts were telling her that she shouldn't check it. Only she had access to that part of the database. As long as nobody had her credentials, they wouldn't be able to interfere with it. She decided against checking the top-secret backup. Instead, she just looked at a tiny machine at the back of the room. Nick followed her gaze. Bang! Nick shot a laser, and the tiny machine exploded. He didn't need access to mess with the top-secret backup. He just needed to know where it was. Naturally, the Tinkerer didn't see what happened, since she was still under Nick's illusion. After checking a couple of things, she left the room again and closed it behind her. The next moment, Nick deactivated his illusion and hid again. The Tinkerer looked at her barrier for a while. She was communicating with the champion, who was on his way back. She told him about the incident and assured him that everything was fine again. Just to make sure, the champion checked through the database as well. He had learned a lot about the database over the past years. Everything worked and seemed to be in order. What about the secure files? The champion asked. I didn't check. Nobody should be able to mess with it, and the physical machine was still operating normally, the Tinkerer answered. This has to be the trickster's work, the champion answered. I'm going to check for myself. You can't underestimate the trickster. Of course, the Tinkerer answered. Outside, a random protector was watching the champion enter Aegis headquarters again. Naturally, the random protector was Nick in disguise. When he saw the champion returning, he took to the sky and flew east. Meanwhile, the champion reached the door to the database, where the Tinkerer was already waiting. Everything's fine, the Tinkerer said. Just open the door, the champion said. Not even the champion had access to the physical space of the database. The Tinkerer opened the door. You see, nothings. The Tinkerer's eyes widened as she saw the destroyed remains of the small machine. She felt like her world had ended. What? But it was fine just a moment ago. The champion immediately released his light and covered all of Aegis headquarters. The next moment, Aegis headquarters went into lockdown. The trickster had to be here somewhere. Over the next hours, every single person inside the headquarters had to undertake an invasive examination to see if they were human or not. The headquarters remained in lockdown for an entire week. The champion was convinced that Nick was still there. He had to find him, no matter what. After the week was over, he finally caved under the pressure of the other shields, who kept telling him he was chasing a ghost. The trickster was gone. Luckily, their database wasn't damaged. However, their research into pure energy had been destroyed. This research was so secret that the other shields didn't even know about it. The Tinkerer and the Champion were the only ones who knew, and the Tinkerer was the only person who researched the secrets of pure energy. The Champion wanted the information kept secret, since he didn't even want the Sun to find out. This wasn't because he wasn't loyal to the Sun. No, it was just something he had made to deal with Nick. If it suddenly came out that he just knew a lot about pure energy, the Sun might fire Nick for failing at his job. This stuff wasn't even on the Tinkerer's barrier. She had to add the information to the secret database manually while physically in front of the machine. Now the Tinkerer would need to transcribe all her information again, and it was possible she misremembered some things. This meant she also needed to experiment again to make sure everything was accurate. To top it all off, she had to do it secretly. Once more, the trickster had cost them years of progress. At least this time, Aegis could still operate normally. Chapter 892. This still is not enough suffering for now, Nick thought, but I just have to wait. Nick told Arya his new status, and then found a hiding spot in the wilderness. The champion wasn't suffering as much, but the Tinkerer was suffering quite a bit. Slowly, he accumulated suffering. 5 years passed. Nick was at the threshold. Just one more push. He looked at the timer of his seed. The timer reached 0 just as the date rolled over. Nothing happened. Seconds passed. After a minute, the suffering Nick experienced increased. Then it increased even more. Meanwhile, in Aegis headquarters, the Tinkerer was once again rushing towards the database. Their database was only putting errors out. She immediately loaded a backup. It worked for just a tiny moment before that one also crashed. She went to a secondary backup. Also crashed. What the fuck was going on? After minutes of trying, she called the shields over to restore the distributed backup. That also crashed. But how? Well, when Nick was in the database, he had programmed a small virus and uploaded it. However, the virus only triggered after a specific date. Because of that, it passed unnoticed and was included in all of the backups of the last 5 years. Due to space limitations, the distributed backup only contained the last 50 monthly backups. After 5 years, the virus would have corroded all the distributed backups. When the Tinkerer used a backup from over 5 years ago, everything worked again. While the distributed backup only had data from the last 50 months, the primary and secondary backups had decades of backups. Nick couldn't mess with those, but he could mess with all of the backups of the last 5 years. Naturally, the error would be fixed by restoring the database to a state of 5 years ago. However, that was still 5 years of information lost. Cities, strongholds, specters, identities, and so on were no longer up to date. This was another heavy hit to Aegis. The Tinkerer just used the old backup as the new database and searched for the error in the newer ones. When she compared the code, she realized that literally everything was different. This was completely functionless and messy code. Naturally, Nick's virus had scrambled the code, deleted the old one, and replaced it with the scrambled mess. How was the Tinkerer supposed to make any sense of this mess? The best and worst part was that it only deleted 5 years of updates. It was good because it was only 5 years. However, it was also bad because simply refilling the lost information would probably take less time than solving the issue. In short, it would be more pragmatic to just accept the losses and use the backup. The Tinkerer could probably find the error at some point, but by then, the old backup would be up to date again. It would be a waste of time. That was the most frustrating part. The Tinkerer suffered immensely. This time, it wasn't the work she had to put in but the hit to her ego. It was obvious this was the trickster's doing. She felt helpless. She had designed all of this, and only she had access to everything. She had no idea how the trickster even managed to do all of this, and that was what pissed her off. It was like the trickster was playing with her. The Tinkerer was the best researcher in the world. And yet, a random Specter was messing up all of her secure systems. She felt humiliated. She felt like her credibility had taken a considerable hit. Far away, Nick was harvesting a ton of suffering. Some of Aegis Extractors were suffering due to outdated information, but the majority of the suffering came from the Tinkerer. Nick could tell she felt absolutely horrendous. As Nick waited in the wilderness, his Zephyx increased. At some point, Nick felt his Zephyx had broken past a threshold. And yet he hadn't advanced. For several days, Nick just waited. Finally, his ability deactivated. A moment later, an iridescent figure appeared in front of him. The sun had returned. "Trickster," the sun spoke, "you have gathered enough Zephyx to become an adversary." Nick stood up and politely bowed to the sun. It was not easy. "Tell me of your duty," the sun said. "Of course," Nick answered. Then he told the sun how he had messed with Aegis. He had encrypted their old database. He had destroyed their top-secret information. He had destroyed the backups of the last 5 years. "Your methods are different from your predecessor," the sun spoke. "Your predecessor stopped advancement. You are setting them back. Tell me about humanity's current technological achievements." Nick did just that. He explained all the machines he found in great detail. "You know a lot about human technology," the sun spoke. "I have to. It is my job. If I don't know about the technology, I would not know how to steer the advancement in a direction you desire," Nick answered calmly. "I desire biological growth," the sun spoke. "Do you also know about that?" "I do," Nick said. After that, Nick explained the workings of a Zephyx synchronizer in relative detail. Naturally, he couldn't be too detailed, and he had to leave some unknowns. "What about pure energy?" the sun asked. Nick gave the sun a blueprint of a pure energy generator that was around 30 meters high and only put out a tenth of the energy necessary to operate a seed. "That is already quite advanced," the sun spoke. "How long until the humans can reproduce your generator?" 1 to 2 centuries would be my estimate," Nick answered. The sun remained quiet for a while. "That is acceptable," the sun spoke. "If everything progresses according to your prediction, you have done a fine job." "Thank you," Nick answered. "You are worthy of becoming an adversary," the sun spoke. "You are granted permission to advance." Chapter 893. The sun's avatar vanished moments later, and Nick felt the pull towards the space that grants abilities. Nick didn't resist. He closed his eyes, and in the next moment he woke up in the void. When he looked around, he saw countless suffering silhouettes. There were millions upon millions of suffering humans. Nick had caused a lot of suffering to reach this level, and it was clear just how much. This is a necessity, Nick thought. The past generations suffer so that the next generation can live in freedom. Nick stood up from his position and searched for the correct pathway. He already knew what kind of ability he wanted. The new ability had to fit several criteria. First, it couldn't be suspicious. The aliens might not know Nick's older abilities, but they definitely had a record of his new abilities. If he chose some kind of ability that allowed him to learn about the biology of something he consumed, the aliens might become suspicious. This ability would help Nick understand the aliens' biology and their biological machines. It would definitely help him, but the aliens would also question why he wanted such an ability. Because of that, this one wouldn't work. The ability had to seem normal and relevant to his job. Another criterion Nick's new ability had to fulfill was that it would help him during his excursion to the alien base. There was a high chance that Nick would go to that base while still being an adversary. The last criterion was that it would help his other abilities. Nick's abilities all worked together, and that was how it was supposed to be. If he had just grabbed a random ability that granted him a powerful attack, he might not have been able to make use of it properly, since that would have replaced his base attack, which made use of his advanced weapons. Luckily, Nick had had enough time to come up with a fitting ability that fulfilled all 3 criteria. In fact, Nick had seen at least one Specter who had this ability. After a couple of minutes, Nick was on the right pathway. The silhouettes around him were still suffering, but they were no longer looking at him. Instead, they looked around in confusion, searching for the origin of their suffering. Nick walked to the end of the path. The next moment, he found himself in a representation of his Specter core. He saw all of the diagrams, which showed his abilities. Then light appeared on the ground, and new manipulation lines joined the old ones. The diagrams that were already present were expanding, and a completely new diagram was forming. The diagrams coming from the Null, the Maw, and the Nightmare were still impossibly complex, but the other abilities were slowly closing in. Nick's other abilities always improved more than the abilities granted by the Eternals. That was because they were slowly reaching the realm of the Eternals. Nick watched the formation of the manipulation lines and tried to learn as much as possible. Old lines were vanishing while many new lines were forming. Everything was becoming more complex. After about a minute, the light disappeared, and the formation of the new manipulation lines finished. Nick looked at the new diagrams for a while. Then he opened his eyes in the real world and inspected his new abilities. Specifically, he focused on the one he had just chosen. Instead of just thinking about it, he decided to try it out. Bang! Nick exploded forward, charging toward the closest city. His ability was active, which meant he was now as fast and powerful as a peak adversary. At this moment, Nick had the power to even threaten death. The champion was still more powerful than him, but Nick was also only an initial adversary right now. Nevertheless, Nick had officially joined the adversaries of the world. There were only around 20 adversaries in the world at this moment, according to Aegis intelligence. There was a chance 10 or 20 more slept below the ground, waiting for their time to strike. Nick remembered the black blobs, servants of the eternal hunger. Back when he had seen them for the first time, he had been in awe of this incredible power. But now he was on that level. Nick quickly arrived in the city. He disguised himself as Julian Winter and approached a specialist. Yes, the specialist asked with annoyance. Hello, I am Julian Winter, Nick said. I am a powerful Specter and I am quite sure you've heard of me. I also go by the title of Trickster. Sure enough, a beam of light was pointing at the specialist. Apparently, the Trickster's identity had been spread across the entire world. Oh, the Extractor asked. He almost couldn't believe what he had just heard. The image of the Trickster appeared in his mind, and he realized that Nick looked just like it. It was difficult for the Extractor to come to terms with this. It was like some kind of immortal monster had appeared in front of him just to talk to him. But that doesn't matter, right? Nick asked. What? The specialist asked. Who was I again? Nick asked. The specialist said absent-mindedly. You talked about the Trickster and Julian Winter earlier, Nick said. Can you elaborate? Who? The specialist asked. The Trickster, Julian Winter, heard of them before, Nick asked. Doesn't ring a bell, the specialist said. Why are they important? No, I was just curious, Nick said. Thanks for the tip. The specialist waved Nick off. Yeah, but that was a one-time thing, okay? I understand, Nick said. The specialist nodded and walked away. Nick looked at the specialist for a bit. Then he looked at the beams. No beam led to the specialist. The specialist knew nothing about Nick. He didn't even know that he existed. This was Nick's new ability, and the real Julian used to have it too. Deletion of memories. Chapter 894. Nick had done the same thing as Julian. He had been working under Julian for decades, and he had seen this ability many times. Julian just talked to somebody and mentioned specific things. This triggered memories of these events, and Julian used his ability. Julian would talk about his identity, and if the person already knew about it, their memories concerning his true identity would appear. Metaphorically, it was like the person walked down a bridge towards a file with the memories, grabbed the file, and returned with it. What Nick was doing was letting the person grab the file. When they were walking back over the bridge, he was deleting the bridge behind them. Lastly, he deleted the file in their hand. The next moment, the person would be confused. They knew they had just grabbed a file, but there was no file. This would make them search for the bridge again, but the bridge was gone. Then the second part of the ability would trigger. The ability would create a new bridge at the same place, and the person would walk down it. They would find a file. But when they opened it, it would be empty. This wasn't supposed to be empty. At that point, Nick just jostled their memory again. The person would think that what Nick said was in the file, but instead of reading the file, they would just write down Nick's words. After that, the person would create new memories to make the file make sense. Brian Summer, the file said he had met this guy before. Where was that? The most frequent files would be gathered. They went to bars a lot. They probably talked to him in a bar. Yeah, right, now they remembered. There was this guy with that name in the bar. Yeah, he remembered meeting Brian Summer clearly. This was how it worked metaphorically. More concretely, Nick just dealt with the neurons connected to his identity, and planted a select few. The brain would do its thing and try to make sense of these neurons, creating new memories in the process. To use that ability, Julian needed to talk to the person. However, Julian had been a fanatic. Nick was an adversary, and the quality of his ability was also at the level of an adversary. The next moment, Nick looked at the center of the city. The governor and another hero were currently there. Both of them knew about him. An instant later, Nick's Zephyx gathered and covered the building. Almost immediately, an alarm went off. Technology had advanced a lot, and there were Zephyx sensors everywhere now. The sensors picked up a surge of Specter Zephyx spreading throughout the building, and it alarmed everyone. Everyone went into combat mode. But that didn't matter. The job was already done. The two beams leading to the two heroes had completely vanished. Everyone was searching for the cause of the alarm. That was when Nick used his ability again. Suddenly, people started talking about stupid technology and how it always gave false alarms. The engineers went to the sensors with annoyance and rebooted them. After being rebooted, the sensors no longer gave off an alarm. That was because there was no more Zephyx anywhere in the building. People chalked it up to faulty technology and forgot about the incident. Finally, Nick focused on all the other beams in the city. Moments later, they all vanished. A couple of alarms went off, but they were all attributed to a glitch in the system. Nick had done it. He had deleted his identity from the entire city, and he hadn't needed to kill even a single human. Compared to Julian, Nick could also delete memories without interacting with anyone. However, this ability had its limits. This worked for fallen, protectors, and weaker, but if he wanted to delete the memories of a shield or adversary, he would need to interact with them. Additionally, there was a chance he would be uncovered if the target was stronger than Nick. Nick calmly left the city. Works just as expected, he thought. This ability makes sense to the aliens as well, considering my job. I can delete knowledge of technology, and it makes it easier for me to infiltrate Aegis. It also works with my primary ability. Lastly, I don't know how to find out how the aliens work without killing one of them, but with this ability, I can experiment on them. As long as they have memories, the ability should still work. I can just grab a random engineer working on one of the prefix generators, experiment on them for a while, make them believe they just had to repair something, and let them go again. Nick dug deep into the ground and looked at his primary ability. This will also help my primary ability a lot. Naturally, whenever Nick advanced, his other abilities also improved. I thought this would happen when I become an Eternal, but apparently it is already a thing when I am just an adversary, he thought. Nick still remembered the old champion's fears and the technician's suspicions. The more Nick's ability advanced, the more important it was to stay as unknown as possible. He had the power of the Null, and since Nick had just copied its ability with his Zephyx synchronizer back then, it essentially also copied part of the Null's ability. As the ability improved, it would become more and more similar to the Null's ability. Power dependent on knowledge, Nick thought. As a Specter, Nick had intrinsic knowledge of his new abilities. The being who knows the most about me determines the power of my primary ability. This is different from the champion's ability. For him, quantity is important. For me, only the weakest link is important. If one person knows everything about me, my primary ability will remain at a 5-fold increase in power. If 2 people know everything about me, the same thing happens. If one person knows everything about me, and there are millions of people who know almost everything about me, the same thing happens. If there is no person who knows everything about me but millions of people who know almost everything, my power will increase. It all depends on the weakest link. At this moment, there is not a single black beam. This means my primary ability is already stronger than before. Chapter 895. Right now, since nobody knows everything about me, my increase in power is 6-fold instead of 5-fold. With a 5-fold increase, Nick already had the power of a peak adversary. With a 6-fold increase, he was stronger than a peak adversary. Sadly, he needed a 10-fold increase if he wanted to be as powerful as an initial Eternal. That's only possible if I am completely unknown, and that's impossible. I won't be able to delete the memories of the aliens, and the Null also knows a bit about me. A 10-fold increase is the theoretical maximum, but the practical maximum is probably only 8-fold. The null most likely has a 9-fold increase, and it kills anyone who makes it drop to an 8-fold increase. Nick narrowed his eyes. The null has to be extremely powerful. It might be the strongest Specter beside the sun. If this were a free-for-all, the null might actually be even more powerful, but that won't happen. The null was created by the sun, and the aliens must have given the sun ways to deal with any Specter. However, I also shouldn't underestimate the true power of the other Eternals. The Nightmare is the weakest, without a doubt, simply because it is not alive and essentially can't do anything. Most likely, the Maw is also weaker. It is probably a level higher than Nurse Alice, but Nurse Alice has terrifying knowledge regarding energy manipulation. She will never show that knowledge openly, but if there's nothing stopping her, she could probably unleash even more abilities than envy. But Nurse Alice is probably still weaker than the null. At my current level, making contact with Nurse Alice would still be too dangerous. I need to increase my multiplication factor, and I have to become an early adversary first. After focusing on his primary ability for a while, Nick looked at his other abilities. The first ability he looked at was the one granted by the mist. Initially, he could only turn into mist and create a cloud of mist. Then it gave him the ability to create a black smoke cover around him. After that, it gained the ability to scramble Zephyx. But now it had changed yet again. Nick suddenly vanished. He was completely gone. But he wasn't. Nick had become intangible and invisible. And to top it all off, his body hadn't changed shape. He traveled through the underground, passing through the dense walls like they didn't exist. It was like Nick was a ghost. Bang! The ground around his right arm exploded as it became tangible again. Nick could make parts of his body tangible and intangible whenever he wanted. Theoretically, he could pass through the barriers and bodies of a shield and make this weapon intangible inside their body. Practically, this wouldn't be so easy. In the intangible state, Nick was essentially still a Force Specter. Abilities that could suppress Force Specters still worked on him. He was just immune to physical attacks. Another bad part was that Nick was only invisible, intangible, and inaudible. His Zephyx could still be felt. It was faint, but experienced extractors could feel his presence if he were close to them. Luckily, there was another ability that somewhat made up for that weakness. The part of the Nightmare's ability that made him immune to darkness. First, it had given Nick the ability to create a dark and sticky cloud that absorbed light. Then it advanced and could create a zone of darkness. Now it had gained the power to hide Nick's Zephyx. However, it had to be dark for that to work. As long as there was darkness around both combatants, Nick would be truly imperceivable. This was on the same level as the envious researcher. The envious researcher could only be perceived by Nick's primary ability. If there were a similar ability that worked on perception, Nick could also be perceived this way. The Empire created several machines that work a bit like that, Nick thought. The aliens probably also have something like that. There's still some danger. Next, Nick looked at his ability granted by the blinding light. Initially, he could only disperse light in a blinding flash. Then he learned how to control the flash. After that, he could focus it into a laser. When he became a Fallen, he could create a blade of light that could damage 4 Specters. Now it granted Nick the power to rejuvenate his Zephyx by absorbing light. The more light there was, the faster his Zephyx regenerated. While this does not increase the peak of my power, it gives me something to fall back on if I can't escape into the darkness. I can use my other abilities much more often, which makes escaping easier. Then Nick thought about his second ability granted by the Nightmare. It works very well with my ability to delete memories. This was the ability that allowed Nick to create illusions. After he became a Specter, he could also control the Nightmare's influence somewhat. When he became a demon, it became more efficient. When he became a Fallen, it could also be used while his primary ability was only partially active, for example, while inside a dark cloud. Now Nick could directly read the memories of anyone under the Nightmare's influence. In the past, Nick had to control the torture to create scenarios that would make people act a certain way. But that wasn't necessary anymore. As long as someone was inside the darkness and Nick could perceive them, he could just directly read all of their thoughts. This was also much more accurate and efficient than Nick's self-created mind-reading ability. This even worked on powerful shields. It might not work on the champion, but it would most likely work on everyone else. The only issue was that he needed to envelop someone in darkness for it to work. In that way, his self-created mind-reading ability still had a use. However, his self-created mind-reading ability also improved. It wasn't improved directly, but indirectly. Nick's increased intelligence had improved it in the best way possible. Even more intelligence. Chapter 896. Nick just became even more intelligent. That was it. It was as simple as that. But it was just as effective as it was simple. The manipulation lines of Nick's abilities no longer looked as complex to him as in the past. This meant his ability to create his own abilities also shot through the roof. Nick only needed a couple of minutes to improve his mind-reading ability even more, and together with his improved intelligence, its base effectiveness also increased. I can read the minds of early protectors with this, he thought. In essence, Nick now had two mind-reading abilities. The first could be used on early protectors and weaker, without warning them. The second could be used on basically anyone, but the target needed to be surrounded by darkness and affected by the nightmare. Sadly, this meant it didn't work on Specters. Nick had improved a lot in all aspects, but there were still three abilities left that had also improved. The first was his ability to create portals. As a Fallen, Nick had been able to create portals in the air. If he made both portals on a solid surface, it only cost 10% of his Zephyx. If he made one on something solid and one in the air, it cost 30%. If both were in the air, it would be 50%. This ratio had not changed. But there was one thing that had changed. He didn't need his primary ability active anymore to use the portals. Now he could just use them whenever. This also meant the portals wouldn't suddenly close if someone saw him before he went through. As long as Nick could sense the exit point, he could create a portal. This was already amazing for running away, but it got even better. After all, the Maw gave Nick two abilities, not just one. The other was about Nick's perception, and this one also improved. Death could sense everything in a radius of about 3,000 kilometers. As a Fallen, Nick had been able to sense everything in a radius of about 500 kilometers. Now Nick had become an adversary, and his ability had increased on top of that. How much could Nick sense? 10,000 kilometers. Not a diameter of 10,000 kilometers, but a radius of 10,000 kilometers. The Earth had a circumference of about 40,000 kilometers. Nick could sense 20,000 kilometers of that. This meant that, at any given moment, Nick could see half the planet. He could appear on top of Aegis headquarters and be in Europe within the same second, thanks to his great perception and portal ability. This combination officially made Nick unassailable by Aegis. Before the champion reached Nick's new location, his Zephyx would have already refilled, and he would teleport away again. At least for now, Nick thought. Prime drones can hinder perception. If Aegis got access to something like that, it would still be difficult to escape. Luckily, that technology is quite advanced, and I doubt they will create anything as effective as this within the current era. There might also be some abilities that can mess with perception. After all, I can do the same thing with my zone of darkness. It's still a bit dangerous, but as long as I don't get caught, it shouldn't be an issue. Also, my increased perception works in tandem with my increased intelligence. Nick closed his eyes. There were hundreds of cities in his perception. Nick listened to thousands of conversations at the same time. His incredibly fast mind filtered the important information out. Within just a couple of minutes, Nick had a full picture of the geopolitical situation. And yet, there are still beings who can sense more. The eternal hunger and the false hope could create their minions anywhere in the world. This meant they could sense not just half of Earth, but all of it. And they were still just adversaries. They must have taken an increase in perception at least 3 times during their advancement. However, they are not very intelligent, and they can probably only listen to 5 conversations at most, if they're even intelligent enough to understand conversations to begin with. Almost all of the adversaries had a global presence. The Salt Trident had stretched across the oceans of the planet. The Shark Mother had its children everywhere. The Eternal Hunger and False Hope had their minions everywhere. And now Nick joined them. He had also become a global presence. This was why adversaries were so powerful and so difficult to catch. Nick had grown so much with just a single advancement. None of the adversaries were a threat anymore. Aegis was not a threat anymore. And yet, he still wasn't powerful enough to even safely talk to Nurse Alice. Nurse Alice could sense the entire planet, and she was impossibly fast. If Nick managed to teleport 10,000 kilometers away, Nurse Alice would still be able to launch several of her countless abilities while rapidly flying to his new location. Nick could not sense anything that Nurse Alice couldn't also sense. Because of that, he wouldn't be able to leave her perception. After all, she was faster than him as well. I have such powerful abilities, but it's still not enough. Finally, Nick looked at his last ability. Disguise. Just as expected, Nick thought. Nick could now make use of pure energy and star energy. He knew how to make a body that worked with that, and he could use these energies to grow. Sadly, the fundamentals of physics were unchangeable, and Nick was confronted with reality. I can create a body like that, but where do I take the pure energy and star energy from? I have generators that allow me to generate all of that, but that's the thing. I need to feed the body with pure energy to make it more powerful. I can't create a body that has already absorbed pure energy. I can isolate my Specter core and create a body like that, but then I will be as powerful as a newbie. I can still use some of my Specter abilities since my Zephyx would still be there, but any slight impact would blow my weak body apart. Then I would need to regrow it and feed it pure energy again. Lastly, Nick looked at the ground. As soon as I become intangible or turn into mist, that body will be done for. It can't transform into Zephyx. I would need to restart from the beginning, and I would lose access to the majority of my Specter powers. That's not something I can do. The abilities I have are the only thing that makes fighting the aliens even possible. How can I invade the prefix generators without becoming intangible or turning into mist? How can I fight their warriors without a severalfold increase in power? Nick took a deep breath. On the positive side, I can survive without issue in space now, and if humanity manages to free itself, I can become a true human again. But for now, I can't do that. I need my abilities. Chapter 897. It was a bit disappointing, but Nick had already seen it coming. If he could store his self-created body that worked with pure energy somewhere, he would be able to switch between them. But that was not how things worked. As a Specter, Nick's center of existence was his Specter core, made up of Zephyx. If he truly wanted a new body, he would need to create a brain, implant his brainwaves, and destroy his Specter core. But that would also just be another him. He would still end up dying. I also don't think that will become possible when I become an Eternal. I'm based on Zephyx, and that won't change. Even if I could somehow transport my conscience into another body, I would still need my Specter core. My Specter core is essentially my brain. With my knowledge of anatomy, I could theoretically swap the brains of two bodies. Sadly, a Specter core is not a brain. The new body won't have my ability, and I won't have access to my most important abilities. Seems like my transformation back into a human has to wait. The aliens have to die first. Then I will have time to transform and start again. For now, I should focus on my primary ability. I need to increase the multiplier of my power. After advancing, Nick traveled to the underground city. When he arrived, he looked at one of the containment units. This one held the Fallen with all of the tentacles. Together with Arya, this was the being that knew the most about him. Nick entered the containment unit without issue. While he couldn't read the Specter's mind, he could still delete part of its memories. "Do you remember when you were captured by me?" Nick asked. "Captured?" the Fallen answered in confusion. "You are inside a containment unit," Nick said. "Don't you remember how the blonde woman fought you?" With blonde woman, Nick meant Arya. She used all sorts of attacks based on light. You tried to pull her into the ocean, but she lured you out and burned all the ocean around you. You couldn't escape anymore, and she contained you, Nick said. "I remember," the Fallen answered. "Is there something you need?" The Specter didn't know why Nick was asking about that. Of course, it remembered its fight with Arya. Naturally, Arya wouldn't have been powerful enough to suppress the Specter back then, but that didn't matter. Arya was strong enough to do that now, and protectors lived for a long time. "She has the ability to disguise her level," Nick said. "She looked like a hero for a long time, but she was actually already a protector." "I suspected as much," the Fallen answered. "She wouldn't have been able to suppress me otherwise." "Don't try to escape," Nick said. "We don't want a situation to occur." I won't, the Fallen answered. Do you remember me? Nick asked out loud as he created a real human body. We met each other recently for the first time. Yes, are you here for work? The Fallen asked via the voice transmission it used with humans. Earlier, they had communicated the unique way Specters communicated with each other. No, I have other things to do, Nick said before leaving the containment unit. The Fallen didn't think much about its encounter with the human anymore. Nick looked at his beams. The beam leading to the Fallen had become light blue. The blue was so light it was almost white. The Specter only knew the appearance of one of Nick's disguises. That was it. It didn't know where he was. It didn't know his name. It didn't know his abilities. Nick was just a random face in an endless crowd of unimportant humans. After dealing with the Specter, Nick took a deep breath. Then he told Arya to make some time and meet him. Arya dealt with all of her work and met Nick in one of the most secure locations inside the containment unit. Have you become an adversary? She asked. Yes, Nick answered with a nod. My abilities have advanced quite a lot. Is there anything I need to know? She asked. There is something, Nick said. Arya could tell that something was weighing on Nick's mind. I trust you, Nick said. If the entire world weren't weighing on my shoulders, I would even trust you with my life. Sadly, that's not reality. Trusting anybody would be betraying all the sacrifices I have forced others to make. Nick took a deep breath. Yet before he could continue, Arya spoke up. I know, Arya said almost casually. I sacrificed my life for humanity willingly. I believe in you. I wouldn't want you to trust anybody, including me. You are too important. If my life ends right here, then so be it, she said. No, Nick said, you are not going to die. Arya raised a brow. Then what was this entire thing about? I do not want to do this, but for humanity, I have to, Nick said. My primary ability comes from the null, Nick said. Arya's eyes widened. Why did Nick tell her? At the same time, Arya also realized why that was so important. She somewhat knew how the null worked. The null wanted to be as unknowable as possible, and that was most likely related to its power. Logically, this meant Nick also had an incentive to be as unknowable as possible. When I am not perceived, my power increases fivefold, Nick explained. But now that I am an adversary, my power can increase even more. And the increase is based on the being that knows the most about me, which is you, currently. I have also gained the power to delete memories. No matter what happens, for humanity, I have to delete part of your memories today. I will not input false memories. I will just delete the ones related to any of my abilities. I know it's difficult, but I hope that's fine with you, Nick said. Nick looked at Arya, who seemed very casual. That's it, she asked. Nick nodded. Then Arya started to laugh a bit. Sorry, it's just. I thought this would be a much bigger deal since you were so serious. I mean, more than usual. To think that you were actually worried about something like that. Nick, I dedicated my entire life to humanity. If the deletion of some unimportant memories can help humanity, I would do it voluntarily. Chapter 898. That's when I met Wintour, Nick said. By now, Arya's beam of light had become even redder, slowly approaching black. Nick's power was falling slightly, but that was only temporary. He wanted to tell Arya everything before he deleted all the details. For once, he could be honest with her and tell her why he had done all the things he had done in the past. You became Dark Dream's chief Zephyx Extractor by literally just holding up a sign, Arya asked with a laugh. Nick nodded. The atmosphere seemed casual and filled with mirth as Nick told Arya almost everything about his life. They hadn't talked like this in centuries. The last time they had a talk like this was shortly before Arya had confessed to him. Sadly, Nick had been quite absent during his relationship with her, and he had never truly opened up. Arya laughed a lot as she listened to Nick's story. After around 3 hours, Nick was done with his tale. Arya's beam had become fully black by now. She knew even more about him than the technician or ghostie had ever known. When there was a lull in the conversation, the atmosphere changed. What do you want to be removed? Nick asked. Everything about your abilities, she said. Anything else? Nick asked. What else would there be? Arya asked. Nick hesitated a bit. Our relationship, Nick said. It must have been difficult for you back then. Sometimes I think it would have been better for you if you never met me. Don't say that, Arya answered with annoyance. Our relationship was part of my life. Yes, it was frustrating and sad, but I was also happy. My past is what made me who I am today. Arya smiled bitterly. I think this is the best conversation we've ever had, and I believe I understand you much better now. Sadly, I will forget about this conversation soon. Nick remained silent. Nick, she said. Oh, Nick asked. I never stopped loving you. Nick looked away. But it just didn't work out, she said. If you had taken more time for me, you wouldn't be who you are. I fell in love with your devotion to humanity. You gave everything to humanity, and you were willing to sacrifice so much. If you made me your priority, you would no longer be the person I fell in love with. Arya released a sad chuckle. This was never meant to be. I am attracted to the very attribute that makes it impossible for me to ever have a romantic relationship with the person who has it. I want to be in your heart, but if you had actually opened your heart to me, I would feel guilty. I would feel like I was endangering our world. I would feel like I was stepping on all the people who have suffered. Arya sighed. But that thought doesn't help me. My emotions want what they want, even if it's impossible. This is my secret, and I kept it inside all this time. Then Arya smiled brightly. Feels good to get this off my shoulders. Nick just looked to the side. His relationship with Arya was the only thing that could still penetrate the gray haze over his feelings. It hurt. Are you willing to kiss me one last time? Arya asked. Nick didn't look at Arya. Several seconds of silence passed. You can't write, Arya asked. Nick closed his eyes, sighed, and slowly nodded. Are you afraid your devotion to humanity might be shaken? She asked. Nick remained silent for a while. I can't take any risks, he answered, indirectly answering the question. Arya just smiled. I understand. A moment later, Arya stood up. Well, let's get this over with, she said, looking at Nick casually. Nick closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Do you remember when I came out of Vernon's briefcase? He asked. Huh? Arya asked in confusion. Nick's heart raced. Vernon told you about his plan and you agreed, Nick said. You had seen me a couple of times already by then. You didn't believe in me, but you had no other choice. Either you went with Vernon's plan or Blitz would be done for. Do you remember that? Arya laughed. Yes, but that was reasonable, right? I mean, who would think that an initial expert could infiltrate anatomy? Do you remember how I disturbed the Sea King's senses with Ghosty's machine? Nick asked. You told me afterward, Arya answered. If I had known Ghosty had such a machine, I would have had more faith in you. Do you remember? Nick went over each instance in which he had shown Arya any of his powers. He could just make Arya forget all about him, and make it so they'd met for the first time when Nick recruited her for the secret research base. But neither side wanted that. They wanted their past together to remain intact. After half an hour of deleting memories, Nick talked about his identity as a Specter. This was also something that had to go. In the end, Arya's beam was light blue. When Nick saw that, he felt like he had lost something important to him. Arya knew that Nick was Nick, but she didn't know he was a Specter, and she didn't know any of his powers and abilities. Nick's power as a shield was explained by advanced technology that could isolate him from them all. Sorry for asking that many questions, Nick said, looking at Arya evenly. Arya just laughed a bit. I get it. I also get lost in memory sometimes. How long have we been talking? Nick asked. Arya took a moment to answer. Something like 5 minutes, she asked. The next moment, tears appeared in her eyes. Outward, Nick showed no reaction. But deep inside, he felt pain. Oh, Arya said in surprise as she realized tears had appeared in her eyes. Sorry, I didn't notice. She laughed in embarrassment. I guess I also got lost in emotion a bit. Nick looked at Arya. Is there anything you want to tell me? He asked. Arya hesitated for a moment. No, this isn't related to you, Arya said. I just remembered Crimson City. Nick just nodded. Then I will be on my way. If you need anything, tell me, Arya said with a chipper tone. Nick nodded again. Then he walked out of the room before vanishing in the hallway. Chapter 899. Nick left the underground city to clear his mind. My multiplication factor has increased from 6 to 7. With this, I am one step closer to talking with Nurse Alice. I just wish I wouldn't need to do all of that. Sadly, my life is not mine. It belongs to humanity. Then Nick focused on the world. Many people know a lot about me, But I can't just delete my information from all of their minds. If one city didn't know about me, that's just an outlier. If all cities suddenly start forgetting that I exist, it will be suspicious. Additionally, Nick looked at the sun. The beam leading to the sun was just as red as the beam leading to the champion. In fact, it was even a bit redder, since the sun knew about his newest ability. At this moment, the sun was the being that knew the most about him. This meant Nick could no longer improve his multiplication factor. After all, to delete the sun's memory of him, he would need to find every alien who knew about him. And to do that, he needed to find all of the aliens first. And the aliens were not on Earth. Sevenfold is as high as it will go. That's still an improvement of 40% compared to my old ability. Nick focused on Earth's development. A couple of days ago, the shark mother had also been suppressed. He just was growing at a terrifying rate. There's not much I can do for now. I have pushed my multiplication factor as much as I can, and now I need to become an early adversary. But that won't be as easy. I could cause suffering to the shields, but that will only be momentary suffering, and it won't be as strong as directly causing them suffering. The growth of an adversary is slow due to a lack of shields. Arya is only a late protector, and everyone else in the underground city is weaker. Advancing will take a while, but I don't have another option. It's the fastest way I have. Nevertheless, I should put on a show for the sun. Otherwise, it will question the source of all the Zephyx I am creating. Nick had to mess with Aegis once again to find an excuse for his Zephyx generation. There are many ways to mess with Zephyx, and since I am going to need a lot of it, I will be using most of them. This time, it wasn't Nick's goal to delay Aegis' progress in technology. No, this time, his goal was to make the shield suffer. It was not a nice thing to do, but he needed to do it. The first thing Nick did was travel to the bottom of the ocean. Just a bit below the ocean's bottom, Nick started to summon one material after the other. The materials were perfectly in line with the architecture of the Suffering Ones, the era that came after the Enlightened Ones. The materials were not very hard, but they would be quite impressive and expensive to the Suffering Ones. After creating a big ruin, Nick added a couple of old machines to it. Finally, he created a crate. The crate would be made with the absolute best materials the Suffering Ones could make. At that point, Nick took out some machines he had gotten from Deep Core Base and started to print materials. The materials had to be made with pure energy, which meant Nick couldn't conjure them himself. Over the next hours, Nick assembled a machine. It was half broken, but it still kinda worked. Finally, he put the machine into the crate and hid it in the center of the ruin. The machine Nick had created could print materials made with pure energy that reached the 4th level. Materials of that level were not special. He just could theoretically create materials that could even contain an initial Eternal. Meanwhile, this thing could only withstand the power of an Elder. However, these were materials made with pure energy, and Aegis couldn't produce such materials. Even more, this was one of the extremely few machines that didn't need a seed. Nick made it seem like this machine had been created before seeds had been a thing. If someone found this ruin, they would think the Suffering Ones had managed to retrieve a machine from the Enlightened Ones that worked without a seed. This would be an insanely valuable find. Sure, the materials it produced were not great, but if they could learn how the machine did it, they could learn how to make stronger materials. Nick looked at the crate. But opening this crate doesn't represent progression. It represents digression. The reason for that was simple. This was not a machine made by the Enlightened Ones. Nick had made it, and he had made it as convoluted and filled with errors as possible. It still did its job most of the time, but it would do so by taking only wrong steps. There was absolutely incorrect usage of pure energy, which would waste an insane amount. There were countless unnecessary transformations of pure energy. It essentially took the amount of pure energy needed to create a level 6 material and only made a level 4 material. On top of that, the material wasn't very stable. It would look fine for a while, but after a couple of years, it would start to expand and grow weaker. Trying to understand the machine and use its workings for other things was like trying to understand the basics of physics by only looking at quantum physics. The person would be looking at teleporting particles that did completely random things while trying to understand why water turned into steam when heated. Sure, it was related, but trying to understand basic water physics by looking at quantum physics would lead to insane confusion. One just needed to know that the water molecules would gain enough energy to break free from their liquid state. Another metaphor would be a person trying to learn the population of the city they were in by inspecting all the grass and stone under a microscope. It would take decades to learn how the machine worked, and in the end, they would learn nothing. It would just tell them what not to do. There would be progress, but the effort put in would far outweigh the progress made. That should take care of the tinkerer's suffering and any researchers below her. Now for the others. Chapter 900. The next few years were plagued with troubles for Aegis. Just recently, they found an ancient machine made by the Enlightened Ones, and most of the researchers focused on that machine. The machine was wondrous, and they believed it was centuries ahead of their technology. They dedicated all of their pure energy production to it so they could see how it worked. After weeks of injecting energy into it, they could watch the machine making 1 gram of level 4 material. The technology was revolutionary. It opened their eyes to how pure energy was supposed to be used. They had been mistaken about so many things in the past. The researchers felt amazing. But they were the only ones who felt amazing. While the researchers believed they were making progress in understanding pure energy, the right arm had troubles. Leonard Spark, the new right arm, was having difficulties with his job. It was his job to make the people believe in the champion. He did so by making them feel safe and cared for. He loved helping people, and this role was perfect for him. Yet recently, more and more cities acted awkwardly around him. He wanted to help and spread the glory of the champion, but the cities refused his help. They just said they had everything under control. After a while of this happening, he decided to eavesdrop on some conversations. What he heard shocked him. People were saying he was extorting them. Apparently, he was going from city to city, offering his services, but as soon as a city accepted, its yearly tribute would increase as compensation for his help. That was not true. Why would they even do that? The devotion of the people was much more valuable than a bit of Zephyx. The right arm tried to rectify the misunderstanding. He told the people he was only doing this out of the good of his heart. However, that made him even more suspicious. What person saved so many people for nothing in return? If these people existed, there wouldn't be any poor people anymore. There was always a payment. The right arm being so adamant about his selflessness just made him seem overeager. Why was he pushing his help on them so much if there was truly nothing he gained? Nick knew the new right arm, and he knew the man was about as pure and selfless as they came. However, that was unbelievable to most people. At some point, it got so far that the right arm promised he would check in within the next year to make sure the tributes didn't increase. Yet when he checked in the next year, he was shocked to find that the city's tribute had been increased by 3%. Everyone treated him politely, but he could tell they all believed he was a liar. If the right arm was not responsible for the increase, who was? Only he had been present. The right arm checked why the tribute was increased in Aegis database. The increase was ordered by the left arm. Why? The right arm checked the other cities he had helped as well, and it was the same every time. Whenever the right arm helped a city, the tributes it had to pay were increased by the left arm. Naturally, the right arm asked the left arm what this was about. The left arm just said the tribute was based on the city's Zephyx production, and these cities produced more. It had nothing to do with the right arm. It was just a coincidence. What they didn't know was that the cities had some luck after the right arm helped them. The number of Specters they caught within the next year increased by quite a bit. But that was also just a coincidence and had nothing to do with the right arm. Yet as all of the cities kept talking about their increased tributes after the right arm helped them, they started to see a pattern. Whenever the right arm helped a city, the city would need to pay more tribute. The right arm and left arm had a disagreement about how to proceed. In the end, the left arm decided to give the cities a grace period after the right arm visited. For the left arm, this was just an unimportant discussion, unrelated to the troubles he himself was facing. Over the past years, the left arm had made several wrong calls. Usually, everything worked out fine when he gave an order, but recently there had been more and more cases of things going wrong. Misjudged levels of Specters. Specters that escaped from chasing Extractors working for Aegis. And every time, it was due to something unforeseen and unusual. This made the left arm feel frustrated. The old left arm had never made such mistakes. Was he that much worse than the old one? Everyone told him it wasn't his fault, that nobody could have foreseen this happening. But as the person in charge, the left arm felt responsible for these mistakes. By now, the left arm was already questioning the intel he had received about the secret adversary the Inferno and the ice storm were chasing. Some time ago, Aegis found traces of a new adversary, and the Inferno and the ice storm were supposed to find and capture it. Yet whenever they had a lead, it led nowhere. For the past years, they had been chasing this adversary, feeling like they were really close to catching it. They were so close. But that was how they had been feeling for 3 years. It was like the adversary was just out of reach. Meanwhile, the newest shield who had replaced the wall was under even more pressure. Within the last 5 years, he had been caught off guard by death 3 times. Every single time, he just barely managed to escape with his life intact. Even worse, death vanished almost immediately afterward. Whenever death attacked, all of Aegis mobilized, but it managed to escape every single time. However, the person who had it worst was the champion. The new left arm was constantly making mistakes. And even worse, the people of the world were losing faith in the champion due to the right arm's reputation. The champion felt his power falling almost every day. Everyone except the Tinkerer was suffering. But that would also soon change. Chapter 901. Naturally, all of Aegis' troubles came from Nick. He spread the rumors that the right arm was secretly asking for compensation. Then he disguised himself as random people who gave good hints that led to the capture of several elders and fanatics. After that, he simply forwarded the information to Aegis. He messed with the Ice Storm and Tinkerer by simply giving them a couple of short illusions and planting some evidence. What about the time the wall's replacement was attacked by Death? Did Nick work with Death? No. Nick simply created an illusion of death and dealt the damage himself. Messing with the champion was not difficult. He simply connected the right arm to the champion. He spread rumors that the champion wanted more Zephyx from the people, and that he was actually just another businessman. He was like all of the others. He just wanted to profit from the weak. Nick had been messing with Aegis for 5 years now, and the suffering he was collecting was quite massive. But it wasn't enough. He needed to cause more damage to Aegis if he wanted to convince the Sun that he was getting all his suffering from them. Because of that, Nick decided to do more. This time he would not hold back. People might die, but only if they were stupid. I will not be able to fight against the aliens during this era, Nick thought. The best thing the people of this era can do is sacrifice something so that the people of the next era might succeed. I really don't want to do this, but I need more power. For the next couple of hours, Nick visited all of the strongholds in secret. By now, there were 24. Protectors were stationed in every one of them, and some even had shields watching over them. But none of that mattered. After becoming an adversary, Nick had become even better at hiding himself than the envious researcher. To Aegis, Nick was an unstoppable power. He might as well count as an Eternal already. The Specters still ruled over the humans. None of the Eternals had been dethroned, and any single one of them could end Aegis. Nick was no longer the suppressed one, but part of the suppressors. After visiting all of the strongholds, Nick looked at the horizon. This might be the worst thing I have done, but I need the suffering. Assistant, activate it, Nick said. Affirmative, Assistant answered. Activation in 3, 2, 1. Nothing happened for 2 seconds. Then a wave of suffering crashed into Nick. When he felt it, he took a deep breath. This did not feel good. He did not want to do this. But this was for humanity. Meanwhile, in a random stronghold. Boom! An explosion of star energy occurred at the main entrance of a containment unit. The star energy consumed all of the Zephyx inside the material, and the explosion destroyed the material itself. The Fallen inside the containment unit looked at the open entrance. At the same time, all the other containment units in all the other strongholds also exploded. Every single Specter contained within a stronghold was freed at the same time. 45 Fallen. Over 300 demons. All of them broke free. Aegis exploded into panic. The protectors in the different strongholds immediately started to suppress the Fallen. The protectors were stronger than the Fallen, and capturing all of them again shouldn't be an issue. There were also several peak heroes in every stronghold, and they would be able to contain most of the demons. But only most of them. The other demons fled in all directions. Nick looked at Aegis headquarters. Will you make your move or not? Nick thought. He hoped the champion didn't leave the headquarters. Because if he left, Nick would free more Specters. And those would not just be fallen. Several seconds passed. The Tinkerer shot out of Aegis headquarters, but the champion didn't leave. You've grown more cautious, Nick thought. You know you're the only one who can keep me away from your headquarters. Nick sighed in relief. Sure, he needed the suffering, but he really didn't want a free war and pestilence. Then it's plan B. Nick waited for several hours. The initial wave of suffering was over, but Nick still harvested quite a bit more. The protectors and shields were frustrated. They had lost over 100 demons, and they needed to create hundreds of powerful containment units. The Specters that had been contained had to be watched manually with Zephyx suppressors. It worked, but nobody felt safe like this. Some people died, but the casualties were relatively low. Around 17 heroes died. No protectors died. I can't always watch out for everyone. Humanity, as a collective, is more important than any single individual. Including me. When the panic died down, Nick made his way to Aegis. He intercepted a protector who was supposed to travel there. After putting the protector into a Specter cage, Nick assumed his identity and entered Aegis headquarters. Naturally, the champion looked at Nick for a moment, but all the credentials checked out. When the champion looked away again, Nick vanished. He had become intangible and invisible. Technically, his Zephyx could still be sensed since there was still light, but it would be extremely hard to detect him. He gave off human Zephyx, and nobody would pay any attention to it as long as they weren't specifically searching for him. Nick easily traveled through the walls in his new intangible state. After a while, he stopped in front of a containment unit. This is a very old model, Nick realized. It's centuries old. But that's to be expected. Nick's perception entered the containment unit, and he conjured tiny machines that would intercept any alarm. Finally, Nick added a tiny one-way hole at the back of the containment unit. The containment unit was powerful, but thanks to Nick's ability and the extremely powerful weapons from Deep Core Base, he could still create a tiny hole. This kind of damage would have created an ear-shattering alarm, but all the sensors were clouded by Nick's tiny machines. After the tiny hole was created, Nick slipped into the containment unit. Inside, he looked at the Specter in front of him. Chapter 902. There was a floating ball of light in front of him. It looked like a Force Specter, but it actually wasn't. Nick could see a minuscule Specter core in the middle of the light, barely a couple of nanometers wide. If it wanted, it could have escaped through the hole Nick had created. But it didn't even try to escape. It is time, the Specter transmitted to Nick. You have foreseen this? Nick asked. Yes, the Specter answered. This was the false prophet, the first adversary Aegis had contained. It came to Aegis willingly and worked with the old champion, turning him into a mid-shield. But countless cities had been destroyed during that process. Every time someone worked with the false prophet, it gave a prophecy. The prophecies had a 50% chance of becoming real and a 50% chance of being false. However, the false prophet wasn't just prophesizing easy things. No, its predictions were often very concrete. The chances of its predictions coming true, assuming it made random guesses, would never reach 50%. If someone said they would win a lottery with odds in excess of 1 to several million, their predictions wouldn't come true 50% of the time. But with the false prophet, the odds were always 50%. My last prophecy was that I would soon die, the false prophet said. You didn't try to escape, Nick asked. Destiny is unavoidable, the false prophet transmitted. I am bound by destiny. You could have still tried, Nick said. Would I have succeeded? The false prophet asked. No, Nick said. Naturally, Nick would have easily pushed the false prophet back into the containment unit. However, what it could have done was cause a ruckus. The champion would notice and immediately charge into the containment unit. Of course, Nick would have already killed the false prophet by then. Then he would have teleported to an entrance, opened it, and teleported away. While inside Aegis headquarters, Nick couldn't sense the outside, which was why he needed to open a door or break through a wall. If the false prophet resisted, it would be more annoying for him, but nothing would change. No matter what the false prophet did, it would die today, and Nick would be able to escape. Did nobody ask for another prophecy after the last one? Nick asked. Nobody did, the false prophet answered. I have become superfluous. Working with me is dangerous. The only reason I am still alive is so that my Zephyx doesn't escape. Nick understood a couple of things. Specter's reason for existence is to cause suffering to humanity, Nick said. You can't cause any suffering to humanity anymore if nobody is willing to work with you. Because of that, the most suffering you can create in your current state is to disperse your Zephyx, Nick said. Destiny, the false prophet said. My destiny is to cause suffering. I will fulfill my destiny. Why not fight against destiny? Nick asked. Destiny is destiny. Everything is preordained. You could leave and save the world some suffering. You have free will. But will you do so? Nick remained silent for a while. No, he answered. You have to die. Your prophecies are too dangerous. The way your power acts is unfathomable. Your prophecies might interfere with humanity's future. Destiny, the false prophet said. You have free will, but only as long as it walks destiny's path. Many times, your destiny is your desires. Why fight against something you want to happen? Nick had already had such thoughts before. It happened when he was learning about biology. Do you want a last prophecy? The false prophet asked. I'm a Specter, Nick said. That doesn't matter. I can create prophecies for anyone, the false prophet said. Why would you want to give me a prophecy? Nick asked. Because it is an opportunity to cause more suffering, the false prophet answered. It is my destiny to cause suffering. Nick looked at the false prophet for a while. Anything could happen if he asked for one. It was also possible the prophecy would turn out to be false. Fine, Nick said. Give me your last prediction. The next moment, the light of the false prophet brightened, but no Zephyx was generated. I foretell, it spoke slowly. During the final battle, you will die. Nick remained silent for a while. Then he sighed. That's good to hear, Nick said. If your prophecy is false, I might not die. But if it is true, that means there will be a final battle. If the final battle happens, I will be confident in victory. It is not me that needs to survive. If there is a final battle, humanity's chances of victory will be high. My own survival doesn't matter. In Nick's opinion, this was a good prophecy. And yet Nick had also gained nothing. After all, there was a 50% chance of nothing happening. The prophecy was completely meaningless. The next moment, Nick pulled out his weapon. Since he was currently being perceived, he couldn't wield his actual weapon, the one he had taken from Deep Core Base. But he didn't need it. Bang! Nick charged forward and cut the tiny Specter core into two pieces. The light dispersed and the Specter core fell to the ground. The false prophet was dead. The containment unit didn't alarm anyone. The next moment, Nick moved through the tiny hole and approached Aegis' exit. He used his barrier and opened it. As soon as it opened a tiny crack, Nick vanished. His perception entered the outside world, and he teleported thousands of kilometers away. The champion immediately noticed the door had opened on its own, and he commanded it to close. Then his light covered all of Aegis. The trickster must be here somewhere. It could only be the trickster. He was the only one who could do something like that. Almost immediately, the champion noticed that one person was absent. The protector who had arrived a couple of minutes ago. The champion searched all of Aegis. But then, a couple of minutes later, the missing protector arrived in front of Aegis headquarters. The trickster, he captured me and stole my identity, the protector shouted. Naturally, Nick freed the protector after he was done. The protector went through rigorous tests to make sure he was not the trickster. When it became clear that the protector was human, the champion realized what had happened. The door opening didn't represent the trickster entering but leaving. He was gone. But what had he done? The champion looked through all of Aegis headquarters. And when he entered the false prophet's containment unit, he knew what the trickster had done. The champion wasn't sure what he should think. The false prophet was dangerous, and they didn't work with it anymore. They had no more use for it. And yet it was also killed. It was good, but it was also bad. It was just nothing. It was just something that happened. Just like the false prophet's prophecies. Chapter 903. Why did Nick ask for the prophecy? It seemed like an unnecessary risk. The reason was simple. If one knew the future, even an uncertain future, one could prepare for it. If the prophecy turned out to be true, Nick couldn't escape his death. However, that allowed him to plan for his eventual death. He could create contingency plans for humanity during his eternal absence. And if the prophecy weren't true, it wouldn't matter anyway. After all, it wasn't true. In that case, it might as well be the ramblings of a random drug addict. I have to prepare for my death. The false prophet's prophecies only have a 50% chance of becoming true, but what if I actively work towards its prophecy becoming true? In that case, there will be a final battle. The worst-case scenario would be that there is no final battle. That would mean I have already died. Nick remembered the false prophet's words. Many times, your destiny is your desires. Why fight against something you want to happen? So many people sacrifice their lives for humanity. I will not be different. I do not wish to die, but that doesn't matter. If it helps humanity, I will be glad to give my life. As long as it increases humanity's chances, I am fine with it. For some reason, after hearing the false prophet's prophecy, Nick felt lighter. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. As Nick looked at the world, he realized that millions of hatchlings had been born. The false prophet had been a mid-adversary, and its death spread an incredible amount of Zephyx across the world. This is a lot, but I need more. Everything is prepared. It's time for the final part of my plan. Nick went into the underground and started to conjure powerful materials. It took weeks, but he managed to create a containment unit that could even contain a peak adversary. When he was done, Nick left again. He would need to take a small risk, but the payout would be worth it. After creating the containment unit, Nick moved toward Aegis headquarters. This time, he didn't disguise himself. He appeared as Julian Winter. As soon as he came close to Aegis headquarters, his ability deactivated. The champion had noticed him. I am here for another trade, Nick spoke from a distance. Deep inside Aegis, the champion was looking at Nick. He knew the trickster only showed itself when it wanted to be found. Sadly, the champion didn't know what to do. What if the trickster wanted the champion to call all of the shields so that another Specter could destroy their stronghold? Or what if the trickster expected that the champion wouldn't think of that? The champion believed he could catch the trickster. After all, the champion was already a late shield, and he had become much more powerful. Meanwhile, the trickster was just an initial adversary. But what if he attacked the trickster and failed? The trickster might retaliate. Even more, the trades with the trickster had turned out very well in the past. Should he try to capture the trickster? But what if the trickster expected that? So should he not try to catch him? But what if the trickster expected that? Whenever the champion interacted with the trickster, things always went its way. The champion felt frustrated and helpless. He felt like, no matter what he did, he would fail. There were only wrong choices. What do you want? The champion asked while pacing around his office. I have demonstrated my power within the last 5 years, Nick said. I did this to prove to you that Aegis can't stop me as long as I want to damage it. I spread the rumors about the right arm. I found Specters for the cities and delivered the information to the left arm. I created false leads for the Inferno and the Ice Storm. There is no secret adversary. That was all me. I also worked with Death to attack your newest member. And I damaged your image in the eyes of the normal people. Nick chuckled a bit. I even fed you a fake relic a couple of years ago. The Tinkerer believes she is making progress, but she is actually learning all the wrong things. The champion grew enraged when he heard that. He had noticed that Aegis was practically falling apart over the last 5 years. I also freed all of the Specters in the strongholds and killed the false prophet, Nick added. I can do whatever I want, and you can't stop me. However, Nick added, how many people have actually died? How many casualties did I cause? A couple, but for what I did, there might as well be none. The champion gritted his teeth. This was the worst part. The fact that the trickster could cause so much suffering without even endangering anyone represented a high degree of control. It was like killing a Specter versus containing it. Containing it was much more difficult. Nick was essentially containing Aegis instead of killing it. If he could exhibit this much control while causing this much suffering, it also meant he could cause a lot of death. What do you want? The champion asked again. I'm open to a trade, Nick said. The reason I demonstrated my control is to show what happens if you renege on the trade after I fulfill my part. Since this trade will be bigger than the previous ones, I will fulfill my part first. Otherwise, you might not believe me. You are also free to decline, but then I would have to advance via a different route. I will grow more powerful. You have no power to stop me. However, you have agency over how I grow more powerful. Do you want to hear my offer? Nick asked. The champion remained silent for a while. Speak your offer. Chapter 904. Nick decided to stay true to his title as trickster and smirked deviously. I will help you suppress death. I know where it is. I can tell you where to strike. With your combined powers, you won't fail. As long as you don't want to kill death, you will be able to suppress it. The champion took a deep breath. Death. Finding death had become extremely difficult since it never showed itself anymore. Nobody knew where death was. Death was a peak adversary. If they could contain it, they could create the first level 9 extractor. That would give them a chance against the Maw and Nurse Alice. Even more, after getting the first level 9 extractor, they could also create a second one a couple of centuries later. The champion remembered the trickster's terrifying perception abilities. It managed to find the envious researcher while still being a demon. Right now, it was an adversary. The champion believed the trickster could pinpoint death's location. When will your side of the trade be considered fulfilled? The champion asked. Will it be when you tell us where death is? No, it will be considered fulfilled when death is inside one of your containment units. However, don't try to fool me. I don't want some political word game where you say it's suppressed but not in a containment unit, and therefore I haven't fulfilled my side of the deal. When it is suppressed, it is suppressed. The champion remained silent for a while. There will be no tricks, he asked. There will be no tricks. I will also not free, kill, or take death after you suppress it. It will be yours. I will not touch death or its containment unit or anything like that for at least 1,000 years. The champion didn't answer for a while. This was a tempting offer. What do you want in exchange? The champion asked. The right arm in the inferno, Nick answered. The champion narrowed his eyes. What do you intend to do with them? Grow more powerful, Nick said. As long as they stay alive for 1,000 years, I will not do anything to death or anything related to it. I don't want them suddenly saying the sentence after coming into my possession. You get death, I get the right arm in the inferno. As long as they stay alive, I won't do anything to Aegis. Of course, if you decide to trigger the Maw to become the first level 9 extractor, that's also okay with me, but that will take a couple of centuries. That's plenty of time for me to grow more powerful. The champion remained silent. This was difficult. Handing the trickster 2 shields meant Aegis would only have 5 for a while. After all, if a new shield appeared, the Maw would take all of the living shields. But death opened the pass to the 9th level. If the champion could become a level 9 extractor, the number of shields wouldn't matter. When a mortal got their hands on a gun, it didn't matter whether they had 7 knives or 5. The gun would be much more useful. I have to talk to the others, the champion said. I will come back in a week, Nick said. Then Nick calmly flew away. The champion narrowed his eyes. Nick flew out of the champion's perception. Then he smirked. Do you intend to follow me? He transmitted to the ice storm, who was around 2,000 kilometers away, looking at him. The ice storm gritted her teeth. Yes, she wanted to secretly follow Nick. No, she answered. Then she flew to Aegis headquarters. When Nick's ability reactivated, he vanished. For the next week, the shields talked amongst each other. They were in disagreement about what to do. They would be able to suppress death on their own with time. But what if we can't? Another one asked. It hasn't shown itself. It might be hundreds of kilometers underground and never show itself again. We would need to feed war enough that it advances, and that will take forever. It was not easy to work with war. It fed on strife, rage, and hatred. Working with it meant introducing conflict between the shields or protectors. Meanwhile, with death, they would just need to sacrifice a couple of traitorous heroes. Working with death was so much easier. A week later, Nick appeared again. Your decision, Nick asked. We made our decision, the champion answered. In the end, the shields came to an agreement. It didn't boil down to war or death. It was about the trickster. Giving him 2 shields would keep him away. The trickster had an unprecedented power to damage Aegis. Handing him 2 shields would cause far less damage. We agree, the champion said. Nick smirked. Good, then we have an agreement. We can start whenever you want. I do not need any time for preparations. A moment later, all 7 of the shields came out of Aegis headquarters. "We start right now," the champion said. Nick looked at the shields. He knew all of them. The champion, the right arm, the ice storm, and the inferno were shields Nick had worked with in the past. The tinkerer came after Aegis betrayed Nick. In the years since, the politician, the left arm, and the wall had died, and they had been replaced by 2 new shields. As Nick looked at the peaceful right arm and the stalwart inferno, he only saw resolute acceptance in their eyes. Just like everybody else, they were willing to sacrifice their lives for Aegis. They were willing to live a life worse than death for 1,000 years if it helped humanity. "Then we start right now," Nick said. The next moment, Nick transmitted the location of death to them. At this moment, death was 200 kilometers beneath the eastern border of the Grand Continent. The 8 of them traveled there. During their travels, some of them urged the champion to attack Nick. They were all there. This was the best opportunity to stop the trickster. But the champion refused. "The trickster is too dangerous. We have to treat it like an eternal. It can't become an eternal, but we can become level 9 extractors. Eventually, it can't keep up with our power anymore. That's when we kill it." Chapter 905. "Right here," Nick said, "a couple 100 kilometers underground. It can't sense us from there, but I can sense it." The shields all stopped behind Nick. They talked amongst each other, preparing for battle. "Take this and keep us up to date on its location," the champion said, throwing a small device to Nick. Nick looked at the small device and understood it almost immediately. It was just a communicator. "Sure," Nick said as he put it on. Then Nick shot into the ground. The other shields followed and spread in different directions. After around 100 kilometers of depth, their barriers activated. Luckily, they were regenerating Zephyx faster than they were using it up. "Stop," Nick said after a while. Everyone stopped. "Just a couple more kilometers, and we will be entering its perception. It is exactly 55 kilometers below my position." The shields coordinated with each other and spread in different directions. After a while, they had essentially surrounded death from all directions. "Is it still there?" the champion asked. "It has not moved," Nick answered. "Good," the champion answered. "Attack," the champion ordered. Then everyone shot toward death at once. "I can sense it," the tinkerer said. Bang! The champion charged downward. "Moving to my position," the ice storm transmitted. Everyone adapted. Meanwhile, death had been completely caught off guard. How had they found it? Death immediately released its black veil, disrupting all senses. "It changed direction," Nick transmitted. "It's moving to the right arm." The shields entered the black veil, and their Zephyx rapidly dropped. A moment later, death appeared in front of the right arm. The infant wailed, and the right arm's Zephyx dropped rapidly. Endless tortures assaulted him. Yet the right arm just retained a peaceful expression. Bang! The next moment, a huge shield of magma appeared between death and the right arm. The wall's replacement had become active. Death attacked the shield and broke it in an instant. Boom! But then an incredibly powerful beam of light covered Death's body. The beam broke through the veil, dispersing it. Death's body became injured, and it vanished the next moment. "It cloaked itself," Nick said. "It's not moving. It wants us to think it moved somewhere else when it actually didn't." The shields all converged on Death's position. This had been a risky gamble. Usually one's first instinct would be to run away, but Death stayed in place. If the right arm had moved, Death would have an escape path. And yet they managed to see through its cloaking ability. All the shields readied their attacks, and the champion pointed his shining sword at Death. The next moment, Death reappeared. "I concede," it said. There was no way it could escape. It could kill 3 shields, and it could flee from maybe 5. But all 7 of them were there. Additionally, the champion was not like the other shields. Since 6 of the shields were all relatively new, they were not very powerful. The new left arm and the wall's replacement were only initial shields. The right arm, the ice storm, the inferno, and the tinkerer were all early shields. However, the champion was a late shield, and he was incredibly powerful. In a duel, Death would not be able to win against the champion, but it would be able to escape. But with all the other shields present, this became impossible. Everyone kept pointing their weapons at it, and Death didn't dare to move. Yes, it was humanity's enemy, but its survival was still its highest priority. So it conceded. The Tinkerer approached death and wrapped the most powerful Zephyx suppressor they owned around it. After that, they dumped it in the most powerful Specter cage they had. It was over. The shields took deep breaths. Suppressing death had been easy. However, that was only because they had caught it off guard. If they hadn't surrounded it beforehand, this wouldn't have been that easy. The champion looked at the Specter cage with furrowed brows. This was too easy. Then he looked at Nick. When they had dealt with war and pestilence, they had lost 2 shields, and that fight hadn't been as easy. But with the trickster's help, death had had no chance. The champion was reminded of the times Nick had helped Aegis against the corruptors. The trickster was terrifyingly powerful. Maybe not in a direct way, but it was incredibly powerful in a very indirect way. The champion was confident he could take the trickster down in a battle. But battle wasn't the trickster's strength. It simply outsmarted everyone and avoided situations that would be bad for it. Bring it back, the champion ordered. Everyone left the underground and reached the surface again. Now everyone was focusing on Nick. They had death in their custody. If they wanted to break the deal, now would be the time. Nick just casually looked at them. The atmosphere became tense. Nick wasn't afraid. Even if Aegis attacked him, he could escape. He would just teleport halfway across the world and vanish. And if they actually attacked him, well, then he would take the shields by force. He needed the power for humanity. He was willing to work together with them and give them something in exchange. But if they refused, he would take the shields without asking. We will check its authenticity, the champion said. You can follow us to our headquarters. Nick nodded without saying anything. A moment later, everyone moved to Aegis headquarters. Nick remained outside, accompanied by the Inferno and the right arm. The 2 of them didn't say anything to Nick. Based on their expressions, they had already accepted their fate. A couple of hours passed. Finally, the champion left Aegis headquarters. It actually is death, he said. Surprisingly, his voice didn't sound prideful or victorious. He almost sounded like he was delivering bad news. He changed quite a bit, Nick thought. He actually cares for these 2. In the beginning, the champion had been cold, calculating, and ruthless. But over time, he became friendlier and more open. Being surrounded by people willing to sacrifice their lives for a greater cause can change a person, Nick thought. The next moment, the champion looked at the right arm in the Inferno. I'm sorry, he said. Chapter 906. That is good, the right arm said with a sigh of relief. Then humanity has finally overcome the 7 corruptors, the trio of destruction and death. The right arm looked at the champion with a smile. The Eternals are next. I believe you can do it. You can free humanity. The champion closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I just wish it wouldn't come at such a high cost. It is what I have chosen, the right arm said. I'm willing to give my life for humanity just like everyone else. My time might have come early, but my silent spark will ignite the bonfire of hope. The champion took another deep breath. Can we go now? The Inferno asked with impatience. I'm not good with farewells. The champion looked at the Inferno and sighed yet again. However, he didn't say anything. I'm not a monster, Nick said. Yes, the 2 of them will go through some rough times, but I won't make them wish they were dead. No one believed Nick. He was a Specter. Take care, the champion said. The Inferno nodded, and the right arm just smiled. The next moment, the champion entered Aegis headquarters again. All right, so, the Inferno said, turning to Nick. Where will we spend the remainder of our lives? In response, Nick opened his hand. Your barriers, please, he said. The 2 of them took their barriers off without complaint and handed them over. You can keep your weapons, Nick said. The Inferno raised a brow. That was quite bold. Follow me, Nick said as he moved into the ground. The 2 of them looked at each other before following. They used abilities to create light around them while traveling through the underground. Suddenly, Nick stopped. I have to make sure this is not a trap, Nick said. Stop explaining yourself and just do whatever you want, the Inferno said with annoyance. What's the point of explaining stuff? Nick just nodded. Suddenly, Nick released his zone of darkness, and all the light around the 2 of them was consumed. Their light abilities stopped working, and the nightmare assaulted them. And yet they didn't move. They remained stationary. After 3 seconds, Nick activated his upgraded ability and read their minds. As long as someone was inflicted by the nightmare, he could read all their memories in an instant. A second later, light returned, and the two shields regained control of themselves. "Was that all?" the Inferno asked with a snort. "I can take more." Nick turned to the two of them. "I made the right choice in asking for you too," Nick said. "Deactivate your light abilities." The Inferno snorted, but the right arm deactivated his light first. The Inferno looked at the right arm and noticed he didn't seem in pain. But that didn't say much. This guy always looked like he wasn't in pain, even when he was. The Inferno took a deep breath and deactivated his light ability as well. He prepared himself for the nightmare's torture, but it never came. His eyes widened in surprise. He was inside darkness, but the nightmare was nowhere to be seen. This felt strange. This had never happened before. "I'm not your enemy," Nick said. "I am humanity's ally." The right arm just smiled bitterly, not believing Nick. "Sure, you say whatever you want to say," the Inferno said. "I think it's better if I just show you," Nick said. "Follow me." Nick led the two of them to the northwest. After a while, he stopped moving. "Can you see it?" Nick asked. The two of them used their senses to look forward, but they didn't see anything but rubble. "Yeah, I can see all the rubble," the Inferno said. "That's not what it meant," the right arm said with a bit of surprise. "There is actually a part in my perception that seems strange. It's like my perception is just washing over it. It feels like there's a blind spot in my vision." "Huh," the Inferno said, looking forward again. "Now that you mention it, yeah, it feels like that." "What I'm about to tell you," Nick said, "can never be repeated in the light. You must never speak of what you will witness. Otherwise, the sun will know, and humanity is doomed." This was the risk Nick had mentioned. Nick was about to show the two shields the truth of the world. Nick approached the wall of the underground city and created a small entrance. The three of them went behind the wall and entered a crawlspace. The next moment, Nick closed the wall behind them and created a new entrance in the wall in front of them. As soon as the entrance opened, the shield's perception washed over the dark part of the underground city. When they saw everything, their eyes widened. Humans. So many of them. Even more, all of them were so powerful. There were thousands upon thousands of heroes, and there were tens of protectors. The next thing they noticed was the advanced technology. While they didn't count as researchers, they still knew quite a bit about technology. The technology was so advanced. There were tiny pure energy generators everywhere, with an output several hundred times faster than even their best pure energy generator. "This is humanity's true resistance," Nick said. "Aegis is just a decoy. Aegis is in the light while we are in the shadows. This is why the left arm and the technician followed me." They were the only shields who knew about this. The two of them hadn't recovered from their shock yet. The entrance Nick had created was one way. They could look into the city, but the city couldn't see them. Nick closed the entrance again, and their perception was cut off. "Is this some kind of illusion?" the Inferno asked. "It's not, but my words aren't trustworthy from your perspective anyway," Nick answered. "I don't think that's an illusion," the right arm said. "I can sense illusions to a certain degree, and I don't think this is one. I think this is real." Chapter 907. "How can all these people survive in the dark?" the right arm asked. "I will show you," Nick said as he moved along the crawlspace in the underground city shell. Sometime later, Nick created another entrance and everyone walked through. "A demon?" the Inferno asked, looking at the Fiend of Darkness. "Follow me," Nick said, approaching the Fiend of Darkness. He stepped into it and the two shields followed. The next moment, they found themselves in a dark space with almost no gravity. They could still feel Nick, and they followed him. After a while, they saw an endless plain of Zephyx. When they saw that, even the right arm lost his composure. There had to be billions, if not trillions, of tons of Zephyx. And then they noticed the corpse in the middle of the plain. When they saw the corpse, for some reason it felt familiar to them. "This is the nightmare," Nick said. Once more, the two of them were shocked. The nightmare. No one knew where the nightmare was. "When you attain the nightmare's ability, you become immune to its influence," Nick answered. "That's how everyone can survive in the dark. With your perception, you should be able to see into the nightmare's body." The two of them had already noticed the strange contraption surrounding the nightmare's Zephyx synchronizer. Several seconds of silence passed. "Do not speak of this ever," Nick said. "This is just a small piece of the power that destroyed the Ancient Ones." The true enemy, Nick said. The sun is part of the true enemy's power, but it is not the true enemy. The enlightened ones most likely succeeded in destroying the sun, Nick said, but they couldn't resist the true enemy. Don't stay here for too long, Nick said, motioning for them to leave the nightmare's domain. Without saying anything, the two of them followed Nick. After coming out of the fiend of darkness, they went back into the crawlspace. Do you understand? Nick asked. The two of them remained silent. Why didn't you tell us? The Inferno asked. Because, the right arm answered with a frown, that would alarm the true enemy. He needs a decoy, he added. Aegis is that decoy. Also, I believe that. The right arm hesitated. The champion, Nick asked. The right arm nodded, and the Inferno looked at the ground. What you think is true, Nick answered. However, he doesn't know it. He genuinely believes the sun helps humanity. Silence. This was tragic. The champion believed he was helping humanity, but he was actually working for the true enemy. I can see the true enemy, Nick said. I am the only one capable of taking the battle to it. That's why the left arm and the technician believed in me. If I die, humanity's last chance of freedom will die with me. Because of that, I can't die. As a Specter, I do not age. I will be honest with you. Humanity will not be able to free itself during this era. We are already in the late stages of production, and humanity's true resistance doesn't have enough time. The era will end. All the Extractors will die. But when the new era begins, we will have thousands of years to prepare. Our generation must suffer so that our future generations may live in the darkness or the light without fear. The humans who are alive today do not represent humanity. Humanity represents our spirit. It represents happiness, freedom, and hope. We must live without hope so that our future can have hope. Because if we choose not to live without hope, nobody will ever have any hope again. The two listened to Nick. They understood what Nick was talking about. After all, they were willing to sacrifice themselves for humanity. They had already abandoned all of their hopes, dreams, and happiness. All for the futures of everyone else. Are you really a Specter? The Inferno asked. You seem more human. I'm a Specter, Nick answered. That is the truth. Then why are you helping us? If humanity doesn't have a future, I don't have a future, Nick lied. He couldn't be completely honest with them. I'm a Cancer, Nick said. Humanity is my host. If humanity dies, I will die with it. Silence. After a while, the Inferno started to laugh. A Cancer fighting for its host's survival. That's ironic, he shouted. You might be the most intelligent Cancer that has ever existed. Nick didn't answer for a while. What I have shown you is the truth. However, I have to alter some of your memories later. You will remember our conversation and what you have seen, but you will not remember my abilities. Sure, go ahead, the Inferno shouted. Today, I have seen what true hope looks like, and while I won't ever experience it myself, I am glad to know others will. The right arm smiled warmly and just nodded. Nick nodded. I won't be doing it here. Do not speak of what you have seen ever, not even to each other. Yes, yes, the Inferno said casually. We know about that entire information thing. Good, Nick said. Then Nick led them out of the city. He traveled through the underground for many kilometers until he arrived at the containment unit he had built for the two of them. I will be very different from now on. The veil must persist, Nick said. The two of them nodded. Nick opened the containment unit, and the two of them were greeted by light. At the same time, the right arm's expression became pained, and the Inferno gritted his teeth. They acted like they had been under immense torture. The three of them stepped inside, and Nick closed the containment unit behind him. His friendly smile was already on his face again. See, I told you it wouldn't be so bad, he said. The two of them didn't answer. Now, let's talk about some recent topics. Chapter 908. Do you remember the time when we first met? Nick asked with his friendly smile. Yeah, the two of them echoed. They were trying to remember, but Nick had already deleted their memories of that time. You don't remember? I told you in secret that I'm a Specter who managed to become human. I am a human who can grow stronger by causing suffering, Nick said. Right, I forgot about that, the Inferno said. You told us never to talk about it, right? Correct, but we are safe here, Nick said. I also showed you the star cannon, Nick added. The right arm nodded. A powerful weapon that shoots star energy at the sun, destroying it. Good, you remember, Nick said. Of course, how couldn't I? the right arm said with an embarrassed smile. It was a big deal. Do you remember my perception abilities? Nick asked. The two of them seemed absent-minded again. You don't? I showed you how I can place perceptors everywhere which tell me where everyone is, Nick explained. Right, the Inferno said. That is a marvelous ability. I'm glad you're actually on humanity's side. Nick just nodded. Over the next hours, Nick changed their memories. In their memories, Nick was a Specter who could turn into a human with his disguise ability. He was the best researcher in the world, and he had created a weapon that could destroy the sun. The only thing they needed to do was help Nick become strong. As long as Nick was powerful, he would be able to free humanity. I even took you in as my disciples back then, Nick said. When Nick said that, he didn't use his ability. However, the two shields were incredibly intelligent. Nick had left their memories of when they saw the truth of the world intact. They knew what they had to do. Yes, Master, I remember, the Inferno spoke respectfully. I'm glad that we don't have to keep it secret anymore, the right arm said. Nick nodded. And do you remember your true mission? Nick asked. The two seemed absent-minded, but yet again, Nick hadn't actually activated his memory ability. You are supposed to grow more powerful with me. Your power will increase mine, and my power will increase yours, Nick said. Then a devious smirk appeared on his face. And when the champion summons the Maw to become a level 9 extractor, you are going to kill him. The two of them nodded. The champion is a follower of the sun, humanity's greatest enemy. Nick nodded. Good, you didn't forget. Naturally, Nick was manipulating their memories in the light so the sun could see it. The sun knew that Nick could manipulate memories, and it was only natural that he would use this ability to turn the two shields into his zealots. Even if the sun paid attention, it would notice that what Nick said didn't make any sense. Star cannon. The sun gathered all the star energy moving toward Earth. Shooting star energy at it would not do anything. That was akin to blasting a fish with water. It also wouldn't pay any attention to Nick talking about being a human-turned Specter. These were all obvious lies to manipulate his food. Should we start right now? The Inferno asked. I can't wait to beat the champion into a bloody pulp. Nick nodded, but don't forget, don't share what you have learned with anyone. All of this is a secret, okay? Of course, Master, the right arm said respectfully. The Inferno just nodded. Then let's start working, Nick said. Almost all of the prefix inside the containment unit was pulled out, and everyone fell weakly to the ground. The memories of the two shields had been altered significantly, but they still remembered the truth of the world. They knew what they had to do. They gave Nick their everything, even their memories. Nick was their ray of hope. He would save humanity, and they would help Nick save humanity. The containment unit was not isolated. Nurse Alice and the Maw could still sense the two shields. Nick's lie had to seem real. If the champion created another shield, the Maw would take all of them. And when that happened, the right arm and the Inferno would try to kill the champion. However, Nick knew they wouldn't be powerful enough to win. There was no doubt the champion would win the battle. Then he would become the first level 9 extractor. But until then, Nick would have these two shields to work with. They would increase his power tremendously. Both of them were early shields, while Nick was only an initial adversary. Working with two shields all the time would rapidly increase his power. And so they started to work. The two of them suffered immensely. They constantly felt like they were dying. Terror and fear assaulted them. But they knew they were doing it for humanity. Every bit of suffering they felt was suffering others wouldn't have to feel. This would be their life from now on. Constant suffering. And they were glad that it was them who suffered. The two shields felt more terror, torture, and suffering than even the poorest person in the worst city. The destroyed potential was immense. Years passed. Advancing at such a high level took a long time. The champion would most likely need over 400 years to reach the threshold of the 9th level. Nick would use that time to advance. For these 400 years, he would only occasionally leave the containment unit to check up on the underground city. When 300 or so years passed, he would talk with Nurse Alice. By then, he would definitely be an early adversary. He might even already be a mid-adversary at that point. Everything had been prepared. Now Nick only needed to advance. That was all he needed to do. Time passed. The suffering continued. and while the three of them were isolated from the world. The world changed. Chapter 909. Time passed. There was not much Nick had to do anymore, which was why he spent almost all of his time working with the right arm and the Inferno. Every 10 years, Nick left the containment unit to check up on the city. From time to time, the underground city needed new Specters, and Nick captured them. With his powerful perception, Nick could find almost all Specters. 50 years after Nick started, he took a closer look at the Nightmen. By now, there were around 1,000 Nightmen in the underground city, and they were growing more powerful. Since the city produced a lot of pure energy, the Nightmen were growing relatively quickly. Nick had created their bodies, so they could advance to the 9th level without needing some kind of transformation. However, just because everyone could do that didn't mean they should. There were ways to further increase the Nightmen's power. Not everything could be solved by genetics alone. Extractors, for example, created shells, underwent consumption, and so on. This improved their power quite a bit, and the Nightmen didn't have anything like that. As Nick looked at the statistics of the Nightmen, he could see the true power of pure energy. The Nightmen were incredibly efficient. Extractors used Zephyx to add something to their base power. Meanwhile, the Nightmen directly improved their base power. The pure energy was incorporated into their fundamentals. This meant their bodies had stamina. Of course, that sounded obvious. Every body had stamina. But did they? Extractors exclusively used Zephyx for their abilities and to move their bodies. However, the Nightmen didn't use pure energy to move their bodies. Their base metabolism was incredibly high, and they consumed a lot of pure energy, but that didn't increase much when they physically fought. During times of calm, they used more energy than Extractors, but during battle they used less. Extractors directly used Zephyx to attack an opponent. In comparison, the Nightmen used their stamina, and when it ran low, they used their pure energy to refill it. Additionally, while an Extractor had all of their Zephyx inside their Zephyx synchronizer, the Nightmen didn't have all of their pure energy inside their human core. A lot of pure energy was stored throughout the body as well. This would be used up first, before the pure energy inside the human core. On a baseline, this meant a Nightman had almost twice as much energy available as an Extractor. Sadly, Nightmen were still helpless against Extractors. There were two reasons for that. First, abilities. The Nightmen didn't have any. They could only fight with their weapons. Second, improvements during advancements. Zephyx shells, and the consumption further improved in Extractor's power. Nightmen didn't have that. So while they were stronger on a baseline in actual combat, they were weaker. But that will be rectified with time, Nick thought. They need to find more ways to manipulate their pure energy. Pure energy is much easier to transform than Zephyx. This makes it much easier to create techniques and abilities. They just need more time. Nick also took a look at the outside world. Nothing much had changed. Another adversary was captured, and the Fallen had basically fled from the surface. Being a Specter in these times was tough. Nick also paid a visit to Aegis headquarters and used his illusion ability to play some tricks. He got access to their database and research data and found that their progress was as expected. They had made huge progress in developing star energy weapons, which proved extremely dangerous for Specters. While they could only produce star energy weapons for specialists and weaker, it wouldn't be long until they could create more powerful ones. These weapons were far more dangerous to Specters than the old ones. Specters that didn't know how to defend against star energy would die with a single strike. Even more, these weapons also worked against Force Specters. Force Specters used to be the hardest Specters to suppress. Not anymore. If a Force Specter just touched one of these weapons, its entire body would transform into star energy. Force Specters usually fought by enveloping their victim, but that had become impossible now. After looking at the world for a bit more, Nick returned to the right arm and the Inferno. The Inferno and the right arm suffered immensely. For 50 years, they had felt like they were dying. It was a life worse than death. Anyone would have already spoken the sentence. But they didn't. Nick was humanity's hope. Every bit of pain they felt helped humanity. The suffering they felt would reduce the suffering others felt manifold. Two people in exchange for potentially millions and billions. The two of them were willing to be these two people. Progressing in the 8th level took a long time. There was a good reason why almost none of the trio of destruction had grown stronger in several centuries, despite essentially feeding on the entire world. Despite working with the two of them for 50 years, Nick hadn't advanced yet. Yet Nick's speed of advancement could almost be seen as unprecedented. The three of them continued working. Another 50 years passed. Nick could feel he was close to advancement. Just a bit more. Sure enough, a couple of years later, it happened. Nick's Zephyx gathered around him, and he felt his body grow in power. He was an early adversary now. With the sevenfold increase in power from his primary ability, his physical power and speed had now reached the level of an initial eternal. Nick took another short break to check up on everyone else after advancing. When he looked at Aegis, he noticed something. The champion has advanced, Nick thought. He's a peak shield now. The champion had almost become unstoppable. With the power of his sun-given abilities, he could probably even fight Nurse Alice, as long as she didn't make use of her tremendous knowledge of Zephyx manipulation. The era is approaching its end, Nick thought. There's not much time left. I have to do as much as I possibly can before it ends. Nick also checked up on the Nightmen and the underground city. By now, the number of protectors had reached 1,000. There were more protectors in the underground city than in the entire world. Sadly, almost all of them were only initial protectors. There were only so many fallen inside the city. Suppressing hundreds of demons didn't create any suspicion since there were so many of them, but there weren't a lot of fallen. If almost all the fallen vanished, someone was bound to notice. A protector in the underground city could only work with one fallen for a couple of hours per week. This was not enough to progress. Yes, the protectors had more potential than all the protectors living on the surface, since they had consumed a peak elder, but that didn't help much. Of course, that problem could be solved by allowing everyone to work with the Ice Maiden, but her existence was too important. Only the most trustworthy people were allowed to know she even existed. Samar had become a protector herself by now. While she had the luxury of working with the Ice Maiden, the others didn't. Arya had also become a peak protector. Sadly, that was where her path would end. She had the opportunity, resources, and talent to become a shield. But why? What was the point? If anything happened to the city's shell, she would be taken by the Maw, and their secret would be exposed. Additionally, she didn't want to advance. The reason was quite simple. She didn't want Nick to kill her. She wasn't worried about herself, but about Nick. The era would reset at some point, and when that day came, Nick needed to destroy all the evidence of the underground city's existence. As a shield, she would be able to survive until that day. And she didn't want that. Samar was in the same boat. They had been working with Nick for centuries now, and they all chased the same goal. Humanity had to survive. Their own survival was not important. Nick was the only one who could free humanity. As for the Nightmen, they were slowly progressing. They had already managed to create their first abilities. However, calling them abilities was inaccurate. Instead of gaining a power that seemed almost magical, they simply used their pure energy to create techniques. One of the Nightmen managed to create a technique that doubled their expenditure of pure energy in exchange for 50% more power. This essentially gave them physical power equivalent to someone one stage higher. If this were a Specter ability, it would already be pretty useful and valuable. Yet it was a self-created technique. Self-created abilities that used Zephyx couldn't compare to something like this. Even with his experience and intellect, Nick couldn't create an ability with this kind of power without working on it for centuries. This was the power of pure energy. It was so much easier to manipulate. With enough advancement, the Nightmen might even be able to create an ability that could reach the power of Nick's primary ability. To gain such an ability, Nick had needed to come into contact with an Eternal. Meanwhile, in the future, a Nightman could just learn it by reading a book while training. Of course, it would probably need hundreds or thousands of years of dedicated species-wide advancement to reach such a level. But it was still a possibility. Sadly, the Nightmen still couldn't compare to Extractors in power. Nick went back to the right arm and the Inferno to work with them. After 50 more years, Nick looked at the world again, but there were no significant changes. Another 50 years later, Nick made another pause. By now, Nick had reached an age of around 660 years. He was already older than any hero could ever become. The first thing Nick did after coming out of the containment unit was look at Aegis. By now, they had suppressed 18 adversaries. There were probably less than 10 left in the outside world, and the ones that remained didn't dare show themselves anymore. They would most likely never be captured. When Nick had been a relatively new extractor, the world had been very different. Back then, the fake forests were everywhere, and the black blobs were also a constant threat. Now they were no longer here. Because of that, the two biggest threats to wildlife had been eliminated. The seeds from the plants humans had been harvesting for millennia had spread across the world. Now there was actually grass outside. Plants only needed a couple of things to thrive: light, water, and fertile ground. Light was not an issue, given the constant presence of the sun. Water also wasn't an issue. Despite the sun's presence, it still rained regularly. Of course, while the rain clouds obscured the sky, the light of the sun still reached the ground below. The only issue was the fertile ground. There were almost no nutrients in it, but that would change. The reason was bacteria. Bacteria spread from the city and died. Their corpses would spread amino acids into the ground very slowly. Additionally, some cities also spread fertilizer on purpose, kickstarting the expansion of nature. Most of the cities were already surrounded by fields of grass, but the vast majority of land was still barren. It was also no longer as dangerous to go outside. Humanity had become so much stronger. The number of specters humanity had contained was incredibly high. In the past, the horde of specters had seemed endless. Not any longer. It was still dangerous to go outside for a normal human, but it was no longer a guaranteed death sentence. The world was recovering. Humanity was growing stronger. People were no longer as desperate. Alas, this is all part of the plan, Nick thought. It will continue to improve until everything is taken away again. The next generation will be the happiest ones in the last 5,000 years. And the one following that will be the most miserable. Chapter 910. Next, Nick took a look at Aegis. He had to look at their technological progress. After checking it, Nick saw that their progress was perfectly in line with what he had expected. They managed to create a pure energy generator, but its output was not great. It wasn't even enough to power a seed. This little bit of pure energy might as well not exist. There was no use for it except to research it. Instead of going after pure energy, Aegis was now prioritizing materials infused with star energy. They were creating shields, walls, and containment units that had star energy pouring through them. This was an incredibly effective deterrent and defense against specters. Their star energy generation had also advanced a lot. By now, they could create a portable star energy generator that could fulfill a seed's pure energy generator. Sadly, they still couldn't use them, since the seed also needed an infusion of pure energy for the initial start. The current era is thousands of years behind the Empire in terms of technology. That's how the aliens want it. Humans are already approaching the 9th level, but they can't even make a basic wall with pure energy. Humanity right now is a dog without teeth. They are physically strong, but they don't have any weapons that make proper use of this strength. They are specializing in fighting against specters, but the weapons they create are no threat to the aliens. The aliens bathe in star energy every day. Everything goes according to their plan. This era worked out perfectly for them. This is exactly what they wanted to happen. Most likely, during the next era, they will go the same route. They have refined their suppression factor, and the Zephyx generator called Earth has become stable. If I die, humanity's hope will vanish. There's still a minuscule chance that someone in future generations finds the knowledge repositories, but how will they make use of them with the nightmare's presence? Light that can keep the nightmare at bay has to be created with Zephyx, which is created by Specters, which are created by the sun. As the ruler over all Specters, the sun can see whatever Zephyx-created light can see. Making use of the Enlightened One's technology would not go unnoticed, unless you can research it exclusively in the dark. And humanity can't survive in the dark as they are now. There are 3 things humanity needs to have a small chance against the aliens: immunity and access to the nightmare, the wisdom of all the knowledge repositories, and finally, someone who can infiltrate the aliens' base without being found. If you don't have the first, you will be put down as soon as you appear even remotely dangerous. If you don't have the second, you won't get the power to kill the sun. If you don't have the third, you will share the fate of the Empire. You will be destroyed by the aliens after you kill the sun. Each criterion is harder to fulfill than the preceding one. The ability to infiltrate the alien's base is the most difficult one. A human can't fit through a hole that's micrometers wide. Nick took a deep breath. I can't die. Humanity's fate rests on my shoulders. I can't fail. Nick was under indescribable pressure, but he was already used to it. The pressure was his constant companion. After looking at Aegis, Nick checked up on the underground city. Everything was progressing smoothly, and the Nightmen had unlocked more techniques. The good thing about these techniques was that the Nightmen weren't restricted to only having one. They could have multiple. Eventually, Nick returned to the containment unit and resumed working with the right arm and the Inferno. Another century passed. It had been 300 years since he started working with the two shields. The world was changing more and more. Nature was expanding. The number of demons in the wild had fallen critically low. Technology that could sense hatchlings underground was created. The prices of demons had reached abnormal heights, while hatchlings could be bought for almost no money at all. Extractors used to be rare. While the actual job of an extractor was still rare, most people still had the power of one. Becoming a John was not difficult, with literally thousands of hatchlings in every city. Humans were living longer and were healthier. The poorer people still suffered, but it couldn't be compared to the past. Now they just suffered because of normal issues and lack of money. Aegis could focus on the city's happiness, since the corruptors and the trio were no longer a threat. There were no more instances of people having to grow maggots in their bodies to feed their children. There were no more armies of babies being born just to turn into food. There were no more mosquitoes that sucked someone's blood when they couldn't pay their taxes. No more specters that caused mass obesity in an entire city. No more hoarding of water that forced most people to drink their own urine. No more cities that wallowed in lethargy, where people didn't even have the energy to move the insects and rats off their bodies. No more cities where the people were split into two groups, constantly trying to kill each other. There were still shortages of resources here and there, and the constant inequality of wealth was still present in basically every city. However, that was already so much better than how it had been in the past. This might be the first time I see Earth how it's supposed to be, Nick thought. It's not perfect, but it's livable. People still starve. People still die of thirst. There are still murders. But for most people, these are not daily occurrences anymore. Around half of the people have never witnessed another person die with their own eyes. If I can make it so Earth remains like this forever, that would be good enough. Chapter 911. How are you holding up? Nick asked. In front of Nick was an old woman. She had white hair, and several wrinkles covered her face. The most pronounced were the ones above her eyes, which formed when one often had an expression of worry or bother. However, there were also many wrinkles beside her mouth, which formed when they smiled a lot. Every body told a story, and her body told a story of many highs and many lows. I did what I could do, she said. I made my peace with life. When I was young, I was only interested in becoming stronger, but I don't think I was happy. That's when you arrived. You opened my eyes and gave me a new purpose. I finally felt fulfilled. I felt like I was doing something that mattered. I did all I could do. Naturally, the old woman in front of Nick was Arya. Nick was around 800 years old now, and he would soon become a mid-adversary. He knew he would continue living for much longer. He would get through the era reset and create a new underground civilization over thousands of years. If Nick were to die during the final battle, at this moment, probably less than 25% of his expected life would have passed. Compared to the life he was going to live, he was still young. But the same thing wasn't true for Arya. Protectors could only live for around 1,000 years, and Arya had already been a hero when Nick was born. She was old. Her Zephyx synchronizer had trouble keeping up with her Zephyx expenditure. If she even used one of her abilities, she would need days to recover her Zephyx. A normal protector could recover that in less than a second. The moment her Zephyx expenditure overtook her Zephyx generation would be the moment they would know she would die. As Nick looked at her, he felt a stinging pain deep inside. Arya had been his first and only love. He still loved her. But it didn't work out. In Nick's eyes, Arya was so bright, hopeful, competent, determined, selfless, and strong. For centuries, She had led the Extractors in the underground city. Everyone respected her, and nobody questioned her authority. She had been as good a military leader as anyone could be. "I feel sorry for you," Arya said with a warm smile. Nick didn't answer. "I'm not sure if I could do what you're doing," she said. "I don't know how you will get past the era reset as a human, but I'm sure you have a way. Sadly, you can't take anyone with you. You will be isolated and alone. You will witness everyone you know die. To defend against the pain, you isolate your feelings. You're living in a world of gray and black." Arya looked bitterly at the ground. "I can't do that. I need people. I might have nobody that truly loves me, but my life is filled with companionship." Nick didn't say anything. Arya also remained silent for a while. "I've done many terrible things," Arya said after a while. "I caused so much suffering and death to protect the city's secrets. Every time I have to make a tough choice, I feel the pain. And while it weakens over time, it never goes away. I don't know what happens after I die, but I will accept whatever awaits me." Nick didn't answer. He wanted to give Arya the opportunity to unburden her mind. After a while, Arya looked at Nick as if in a trance. Nick could see the love, pain, regret, and acceptance in her eyes. For half a minute, the two of them only looked at each other. "You still look the same," Arya said. "When I see you, I see the liaison who changed Crimson City. When I see you, I am reminded of the light you have given me." She smiled sadly. "Meanwhile, I have become old. I am no longer who I used to be," she said. "And yet," Nick said, "you have become more beautiful than you have ever been." Arya looked at Nick in shock. She could hear actual emotion in Nick's voice. "You are wrong," Nick said. "You said there's nobody who truly loves you." Nick took a deep breath. "I never stopped loving you. I still love you to this day." Arya looked at Nick in shock. Then tears came out of her eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you saying that now?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," Nick said. "I never stopped loving you. You are the person I'm thinking of the most." Arya sobbed. "Look at you," she said with a sad smile. "You made an old woman cry." Nick's insides were shaking. There was so much pain and regret. The next moment, Nick slowly approached Arya and hugged her. Arya's eyes opened wide as Nick held her tight. Then more tears came out of her eyes. "I'm sorry, Arya," Nick said. "I'm sorry that I wasn't good enough." "Don't say that," she answered. "You are humanity's hope. I would never forgive myself if you wasted your time on me." Nick didn't answer. Sadly, despite the pain he felt, he knew he could never give Arya what she deserved. His mission was more important than either of them. "I'm still sorry," Nick said as he held her. Arya released a weak chuckle. "Then be sorry." Nick just nodded. The two of them held each other for several minutes. "Nick," Arya spoke, "this is the happiest moment of my life." "Thank you." Nick held her close. "If I could die in your arms right now, it would be the best ending I could ever wish for. Sadly, we can't choose the time of our deaths." Nick remained silent. "I can make it so if you wish," he said. Arya slowly moved back and pushed Nick away. "No," she said. "I wouldn't want you to go through that. I chose not to become a shield so you wouldn't have to do that. You have more important things to do than spend time with me." Nick didn't answer. Sadly, she was right. The champion could summon the Maw any moment now. He didn't have time, and Arya's time of death was not certain. She could live for up to 10 more years, and Nick couldn't spend his time here. "I'm sorry," Nick said. "Go, it's fine," Arya said, all her tears gone. "Save humanity." Nick took a deep breath and nodded. "Goodbye, Arya," he said. "Goodbye, Nick," she answered. "I love you," Nick said. Some tears appeared in Arya's eyes again. "I love you too." Nick took another deep breath. Then he vanished. Some seconds later, Arya collapsed to her knees and started to sob uncontrollably. Nick didn't watch. This was the last time they saw each other. Chapter 912. As Nick left the underground city, he tried his best to focus on the task at hand. He knew Arya would die soon, and that this was the last time he'd see her. It hurt. A lot of regret assaulted Nick. "Regret for my own happiness is not important," Nick thought. "I was never destined to be happy. I was destined to sacrifice myself for humanity. I'm sorry, Arya. I could never have made you happy. If there is a next life, I hope you find someone better." Nick returned to the containment unit and resumed working with the right arm and the Inferno. By now, both of them had become mid-shields. After all, while Nick benefited from working with them, they also benefited from working with him. If the two sides could continue working forever, they could even reach the 9th level. Sadly, time was limited. After around 40 more years of work, Nick managed to become a mid-adversary. As a mid-adversary, he finally had the power to resist some of the Eternals. Most likely, the Null and the Sun would still be able to kill Nick without any issues, but the other three would have difficulties. As for the champion, Nick wasn't sure, but he might have the power to assassinate him. The time will soon approach, Nick told the two shields in front of him. I don't think I will be able to advance another level before the champion becomes the first level 9 extractor. It was an honor working with you, Master, the right arm spoke. The Inferno nodded. We're going to kill the champion as soon as he invokes the maw. Good, Nick said. I hope you succeed. The two of them nodded again. Be prepared to be summoned at any moment, Nick said. We are, the two answered. A moment later, Nick vanished from the containment unit. Of course, Nick knew they would fail. The champion's power was incredible. By now, the world was worshipping the champion like a god. He had improved the lives of all the people, and they were eternally grateful. Everyone believed in him, and his power had reached an incredible level. The champion never told me about his ability, but it is probably like my primary ability, just with different parameters. I would think his power is at the maximum, which would probably be a 10-fold increase. He was already able to resist death in a direct battle when he was merely a mid-shield. Even more, he hadn't been experienced in combat back then, and he just used his powers without thinking about it. By now, he has probably trained for centuries, and he can't be compared to his old self anymore. If the current champion were still a mid-shield, he could probably kill death in a duel. A battle between us would most likely end with a single strike. Either I manage to assassinate him, or he will kill me. Nick took a deep breath. However, when he becomes a level 9 extractor, his perception will probably stretch across the entire planet. He will be no different from the sun. Fleeing would be almost impossible. I have to be careful of him. I'm most likely his next target. If I don't want to die very soon, I need to learn about energy manipulation. It's time to confront Nurse Alice. Nick flew towards Piercing Heaven base and stopped beside it. Right now, Nick was deep underground, and nobody was perceiving him. A moment later, Nick assumed the guise of Julian Winter. However, he created a human body that looked like Julian Winter, not a Specter body. This was important. Then Nick took a deep breath. I want to die, he spoke. Almost instantly, Nick's primary ability deactivated, and he could feel who was perceiving him. Naturally, it was Nurse Alice. Nurse Alice was currently inside the ocean between Europe and the Great Triangle, and she had turned to look at him. Nick also turned to look in her direction. It was almost impossible to find the Eternals under normal circumstances, since they were amazing at staying hidden. But as soon as Nurse Alice looked at Nick, he could immediately see her. The Pure One, the Ice Maiden, the Jolly Cannibal, and the Caretaker, Nick spoke. Nurse Alice's expression didn't change. I will move away from Piercing Heaven base, Nick spoke. Come talk to me whenever you feel it's safe. Nick knew Nurse Alice didn't want to get close to Piercing Heaven base, since it was connected to her. Most likely, the Eternals were under almost constant surveillance by the Sun, and if she approached any of these bases, the Sun might notice. Nurse Alice didn't answer. Meanwhile, Nick surfaced to a depth of only 10 kilometers and moved closer to her. As soon as Nick was 2,000 kilometers away from Piercing Heaven base, Nurse Alice started to move. Her speed was absolutely crazy, and she reached Nick in barely a second. 2,000 kilometers in a single second. No wonder she could reach any city on Earth within seconds. Nurse Alice arrived in front of Nick, and the two of them looked at each other. I assume you're under surveillance, Nick transmitted to Nurse Alice via the unique way Specters communicated. Why did you call me? She asked with a dark voice which was unusual. Usually, Nurse Alice talked very warmly and nicely. But right now, she seemed threatening and dangerous. You know something that I want to know, Nick said. And what's that? Nurse Alice asked. Energy manipulation, Nick said. I am the envious researcher's replacement, and I need to learn more about technology so I can better control humanity's technological progress. As an Eternal, you probably know a lot. We are both working for the same employer. Maybe you want to help a colleague out, Nick asked. I have nothing to teach you, Nurse Alice said. Do not call for me again or I will kill you. The only reason you're still alive is because you're also working for the sun. Chapter 913. Sorry for that, Nick said with a chuckle. Then he reached into the emptiness and took out a Zephyx crystal before throwing it to Nurse Alice. Take this as a token of apology, he said. Nurse Alice didn't look at the Zephyx crystal. Instead, she looked at the empty space in front of Nick. Naturally, Nick didn't want to pay Nurse Alice. The only reason he had taken out the Zephyx crystal was to show her that he had a sanctuary with him. The Pure One was the only one who knew where the sanctuaries were. The fact that Nick had one meant the Pure One trusted him. I don't need your apology. I'm not a human, Nurse Alice said, destroying the Zephyx crystal and dispersing its contents into the atmosphere. So are you willing to teach me or not? Nick asked. I already said no, Nurse Alice said. Why are you so afraid? Nick asked. Are you afraid our employer is watching? I can tell you with certainty that it's not watching, at least not me right now. Nurse Alice narrowed her eyes. Then Nick felt Nurse Alice's Zephyx manifesting. That was when Nick noticed something terrifying. The beam leading to Nurse Alice was becoming a darker red. It didn't turn completely black, but it stopped at dark red, lowering Nick's power multiplier from 7-fold to 6-fold. Nick did his best not to show any reaction, but he was shocked deep inside. Nurse Alice just stood in front of him, and somehow she'd managed to see through all of his abilities. You should understand now, Nurse Alice said threateningly. You have things to hide too. Terrifying, Nick thought. She saw through basically all of my abilities with a single glance. This must be one of her self-created abilities. Since she knows basically everything about energy manipulation, she can probably infer what I can do just by looking at my Zephyx. I should have expected that, but what's done is done. I didn't really have a choice in this matter. I need her knowledge. Without it, humanity is doomed. A life for a life, Nick said. You know I have your life in my hands, which is why you're showing me that you have mine in yours as well. Specters want to survive, Nurse Alice said. The implication was clear. She refused to teach Nick anything. If I kill you, Nick said, I will die as well. If you kill me, you will die as well. Incorrect, Nurse Alice answered. I'm an eternal. I could kill you right now and I might survive. Could, Nick said, but you can't. Nurse Alice looked coldly at Nick. The next instant, an apocalyptic amount of Zephyx came out of her. Boom! The area around Nurse Alice exploded with a black explosion that contained terrified expressions. At the same time, Nick appeared 10,000 kilometers away. Naturally, he had immediately summoned a portal to escape. But then another portal appeared in front of Nick, and Nurse Alice stepped out of it. She has the same ability, Nick thought as he looked at her evenly. You can't escape, Nurse Alice said. This was just a warning. No matter where you run, I can follow you and continue attacking. If I had been serious, you would be dead right now. Nick looked at her. Maybe, Nick said, but you weren't, were you? Don't force me, Nurse Alice said. Why not? Nick asked. If you could kill me, you would do it without hesitation. I'm a danger to your life. Leaving me alive has no benefit to you. Why try to intimidate me? That would leave. Boom! Nick's surroundings exploded again. An instant later, a storm of lightning and fire bathed the area. Yet there was also a black cloud of smoke expanding. The surroundings warped as terrifying visages consumed the black smoke. Crack! But then one of the visages consumed a small sphere made of metal. Whoom! A white explosion turned the visage into white dust. Nurse Alice defended herself by summoning mountains of earth around her, which quickly turned into white mist as well. That was when 50 laser rifles appeared in the air, all pointing at Nurse Alice. Bang! All 50 of them fired white beams at once. Nurse Alice summoned more defenses, but they were all turned into white mist. Then over 10 prime drones appeared in the air, and they all fired their own white beams at Nurse Alice. The beams were not powerful, but they were made of star energy. Nurse Alice destroyed the rifles and the prime drones with a single attack. That was when another white explosion appeared, bathing everything in star energy. Nurse Alice appeared on the other side of the planet. You know you can't kill me easily, Nick said as he came out of a portal in front of Nurse Alice. Nurse Alice's Zephyx exploded out again, but Nick didn't move. He just looked at her. Technology, Nick said. You have more abilities than me, and your versatility is much more terrifying than mine. But you don't know anything about technology, Nick said. So what if you know of my abilities? What does it matter? I'm good enough that I can survive under your assault for a while, and that's all I need to do. Nick lifted seemingly nothing and showed it to Nurse Alice. You don't know what's in there, he said. Do you have any idea how many weapons were in Deep Core Base? Do you know how many anti-Specter weapons I can create in several centuries? I can turn into a Force Specter, which forces you to use attacks against Force Specters. But then I unleash star energy and turn into a human. I remain unaffected by the star energy, while you have to sacrifice Zephyx to resist. I switch back and forth. During a long battle you might win, but that won't solve your issue, will it? Nurse Alice just looked at Nick with an unimpressed expression. So what? She asked. Nothing has changed. You have my life in your hands, but I also have your life in my hands. You are a Specter, I am a Specter. We won't throw our lives away. Nick's eyes narrowed. You might be a Specter, Nick said. But I used to be human. And I haven't lost my humanity.